Good morning, I'm Peter Balte. Welcome to the May 21st, 2020 meeting of the Palo Alto Architecture Review Board. At the start of the meeting, I'd like to read a statement. Pursuant to the provisions of California Governor Executive Order number N2920, issued on March 17th, 2020, to prevent the spread of COVID-19, this meeting will be held by virtual teleconference only, with no physical location. The meeting will be broadcast on cable TV channel 26 and live on the Mid-Penn Media Center at midpennmedia.org. Members of the public who wish to participate can do so by email, phone, or computer. To ensure participation in a particular item, we suggest calling in or connecting online 15 minutes before the item you wish to speak on. For written communication, please send an email to arb@cityofpaloalto.org. Spoken comments via a computer will be accepted through the Zoom teleconference meeting. To address the board, go to zoom.us/join. Meeting ID is 999-1994-3549. You will be asked to enter an email address and name. We request that you identify yourself by name, as this will be visible online and will be used to notify you that it is your turn to speak. When you wish to speak on an agenda item, click on Raise Hand. The moderator will activate and unmute speakers in turn. When called, please limit your remarks to the time limit allotted. The timer will be shown on the computer to help keep track of your time. Spoken public comments using a smartphone will be accepted through the Zoom teleconference meeting. To address the board, download the Zoom application onto your phone from the Apple App Store or Google Play Store, and enter the meeting ID 999-1994-3549. Please follow the previous steps A through D. Spoken comments using a regular phone, call 1-669-900-6833 and enter meeting ID 999-1994-3549. When you wish to speak on an agenda item, hit *9 on your phone so we know that you wish to speak. You will be asked to provide your first and last name before addressing the board. You will be advised how long you have to speak. When called, please limit your remarks to the agenda item allotted. To better facilitate public comments at the beginning of the meeting, our host, Vin Yuen, will identify each person with a raised hand by name or last four digits of your phone number and request that you state your name and the agenda item you wish to speak on. If you wish to speak under any item not on the agenda, please state your intent to speak under oral communications. When it is your time to speak during public comment, you will be identified and provided 3 minutes to speak. Any callers with blocked numbers will wait until the end of the speaker portion. The host will unmute them one at a time and all will be asked to speak. Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Chair Balte.
Present.
Board Member Hirsch.
Here.
Board Member Lee.
Present.
Board Member Liu.
Here.
Vice Chair Thompson.
Present.
We have a quorum. Thank you.
Okay, next item on the agenda is oral communications. Is there any member of the public who wishes to speak, to address us on any item that's not on the agenda? Vin, do we have anybody?
We do not have any raised hands at this time, so I believe we may proceed with the agenda.
Okay, next item is agenda changes, additions, and deletions. I think we don't have any changes. Jody, do we have any changes?
No changes at this time.
Okay, next item is city official reports. Could you give us a report, please, Jody?
Yes, 1 second. Let me pull this up. So for the, we're continuing on with our virtual meetings that we will have today. For the next hearing, June 4th, we don't have any action items. The only item that we have would be 380 Cambridge, which is a subcommittee review. And so I would just need from the chair which members would be attending that.
Okay, you would have the subcommittee even though we don't have a regular meeting?
Correct. I have checked with the attorneys and it's fine to do it that way. You know, we are announcing it now that we're going to have such a subcommittee. We will have agendas posted online, but that's all that we need to do for subcommittees.
And the staff is happy with that inefficiency of holding just a meeting for that purpose, rather than delaying it?
We're trying to, you know, during these interesting times, we're trying to move projects forward, and we don't have anything else for the agenda.
I think the subcommittee for that should probably be composed of David and Ozma, if they're willing to do that as a special meeting. David, is that interesting?
Yeah, fine by me.
Ozma, how do you feel about that one?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so let's put those two down for the subcommittee. So that's decided for you, Jody. That way, Vin doesn't
Okay.
call me in the middle of the week.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else on official reports?
No.
Great. Then we move on to our first action item, which is public number 2 here. 3585 El Camino Real, consideration of a major architecture review to allow the demolition of an 800 square foot commercial building and the construction of a new 3-story mixed-use project, including 2,400 square feet of office space and 3 residential units. This is a housing incentive program with varied requests to deviate from the parking lot shading requirements. Before we start, do we have any disclosures for this project?
Yes,
Okay, David.
had a meeting at the architect's office. We really concerned mostly about the issue of the shading in the parking lot. So that's pretty much it.
Okay, thank you, David. I'm sorry about that. Any other disclosures? I will.
also disclose that I did meet with the applicant and, visited the site multiple times.
Thank you, Grace. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll disclose that I visited the site and I looked at the lighting cut sheets online because I didn't see them in the drawing set.
Thank you. Ozma, anything?
I visited the material board at City Hall.
Okay, and I did visit the site myself as well to get a better understanding of the situation. Okay, everybody, thank you for those disclosures. Before we get started, Vin, do we have any public comments to expect for this one today so far?
No one has indicated that they have public comments for this item.
Okay, then why don't we get started with the staff report on this, please? Is that Sheldon?
Yes, thank you. Let me get that set up.
Go ahead, Sheldon.
Chair Bolte, I just want to add that Timothy Maloney just raised his hand for this item, so I guess we can call on him once we get to public comments.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Sheldon Ossing. I'm a planner. And today, just to go over what we're going to talk about, have a project overview of what we're providing you a little bit about the site context. And it's a small site. It's on El Camino Real, a little different context than, say, a project in the downtown area. And then how the housing incentive program has really benefited this project. This will be, I think, one of the first projects that we use this program on. And then going into a little more South El Camino Real guidelines, a little more detail within the project plans, and also the issue mentioned about the parking lot shade canopy issue and a topic of the variance. We will display some of the materials and then we'll go through our recommendation. So a little more about the project. It's a formal review of a mixed-use project located within the Ventura neighborhood area. It's on a small site. It's just over 6,000 square feet. Kind of put that into perspective, that's the same size lot as a typical single-family house. It is a new 3-story mixed-use building. You have some office on the first floor, office on the second floor, as well as 3 residential units. In the project, it's zoned community commercial, neighborhood commercial, and the project does use the housing incentive program to get through some of the issues that we initially had with the project. It's also subject to the performance criteria standards. It's listed 1823. the context-based design criteria standards, and those support the request for an architectural review, as well as the variance. This is for clarification and recommendation for approval today. We have included the findings in your packet. So a little bit of background, as I mentioned, this project was submitted back in 2017 and ran into some hurdles since the site required that if you wanted to include residential mixed use, you had to have a minimum of 3 units. And so there were some constraints, site constraints, given the small size of the lot. And since that time, the city adopted a housing incentive program. That's helped alleviate some of these constraints, but not all of them, as we'll go through. The project did go through the ARB formal review back in October. It's a 3-story mixed-use project there. At that time, the board had mentioned to demonstrate compliance with the South El Camino Real guidelines, provide some additional samples of materials, also to discuss the relationship with the building that's across the alley. The site does include 3 sides of it, basically on streets, essentially. And there's existing 2-story residential building behind. To also demonstrate some relief in the facades, to also replace in the ground floor windows, describe the pedestrian experience a little better along El Camino Real and Matadero Road. And then there was an issue with the perimeter parking lot landscaping, and the board wanted the project to retain that landscaping, and then also have some consideration for some signs. So a little bit more about the site context, and this project is also on the same agenda as another project that has a small site as well, and I think unintentionally became sort of a study of microlots. But we do want to hit home, this is really a different situation here along El Camino Real than it is in the downtown regarding some of the setbacks and other site constraints. But this project also does have an alley in the back, as you can see, and you have some overhead utilities that provide some additional design constraints. But the site does include the existing 800 square foot former automobile service building. The site was considered contaminated, but has since been remediated and given closure by the oversight agencies. There are other 2-story commercial buildings within the vicinity, as well as some vacant parcels. So the housing incentive program was adopted to implement the comprehensive plan policies to promote additional housing and production in the city. And so for residential mixed-use projects along El Camino Real, the director can waive the following requirements when the project is consistent with the architectural review findings. And so those here applicable are the maximum FAR is not to exceed a total of 1.5 to 1. The base CN district allows 1.0 to 1 FAR. So this project does take advantage of that. It's at 1.1 to 1. And then the maximum lot coverage, base CN allows up to 50%. And I think this project is up to 60%. So the applicant did revise in response to the board's initial comments the following. They did reduce the office square footage. They put some of that square footage back into the residential units. And in reducing the office space, they were afforded to reduce the amount of parking on the site. So in doing that, they actually added some more landscaping in the rear. You see that in site plans, some permeable pavers, and also 2 larger trees that could be accommodated in that rear parking area now. Project does formally include about 2,300, 2,400 square feet of commercial space. It's about 0.38 to 1 FAR. That does include some shared space, 3 residential units, totaling 4,500 square feet. So it does include some shared space, and that's 0.72 FAR. The total FAR is 1.1, and the site coverage is 60%. So some of the notable development standards that's important to show is that in the CN district, you have to, for other projects as well as on El Camino Real, show that you have an effective 12-foot sidewalk. And the first floor of this project is set back about 5 feet to accommodate that. There's an additional 5-foot setback for the street side, which is on Matadero. And so you wouldn't get that in the downtown area. You have a 0 setback requirement there. And, open space covers 35%, and the parking lot shade canopy, we'll get to more detail about that. The requirement is 50%, the maturity at 15 years. In addition to these zoning requirements, you have the South El Camino Real design guidelines. And for properties that are in this retail node district, 75% of the frontage needs to be built to that setback for El Camino Real. And then likewise for the side street, 50% needs to be built to for that setback. And those guidelines also encourage you to take access from a side street. It does mention that if you have an alley, to consider that as well. And this project did look at having access off the alley, and that was problematic for adding additional traffic and having sensitivity to that residential building behind. Also, the guidelines state you should have orientation of the building towards El Camino Real. This project does that. It includes the front of really the building itself is frontage of El Camino Real. The back is along the alleys where you have your parking and your other service employees. And then also includes articulated base, body, and roof guidelines. So some of the project comparisons from before, the left side shows you what was previously shown. The right side is what's presently shown. And at the board meeting, there wasn't really a direct direction to change necessarily the architecture of the building. It just said to consider the El Camino Real guidelines, demonstrate compliance with those. So the applicant didn't change the front of the building, but the rear of the building as a result of, and the rear of the site as a result of removing some office square footage, they're able to put in some more landscaping. So you can notice that there are a couple of trees that are on the opposite side of the driveway there. There are 2 London planes, so those are actually street trees size type of trees. So that should make a difference there. And then here you can see in the site plan view of the changes that they made. And again, it's to really the rear, but since they were able to remove one of the parking spaces in the puzzle lift, now you have that extra 8 feet or so of landscaping at the end of the driveway. And that's where they could put the long-term bicycle parking spaces. They moved that from fronting the alley. And then they added the 2 trees there as well. And you can see in the back where you have all the other utilities, such as the transformer pad, the electrical switch gear, you have the trash area, you have the parking, the surface parking is required. When you have mechanical lift parking, you need to have service parking. You can't put accessible parking in the mechanical lifts. And you need to also provide for the pathways to these accessible parking spaces. And again, as I mentioned, you have the overhead utilities there, so you're limited at the size of the trees that you can put along that alley. So here you can see the project is one story taller than the adjacent properties. The first floor or base of the building is consistent with the neighboring building, maintaining that rhythm and pattern. So the parking lot shading is a requirement, and in the parking code, and specifically it states that surface parking areas shall include tree plantings designed to result 50% shading of that surface areas within 15 years. And it does specify the size of trees that you need to put in there at the time of construction. So this project, again, showing the areas that needs to be shaded. That's the driveway, those parking spaces there. With the revision of the project, the applicant was able to add additional trees at the end of the driveway. These are London plane trees, as I mentioned, the same as the street trees that are proposed. So there'd be really nice canopy trees. And the other trees along the alley are Japanese maples. They're very slow growing. They're small canopy trees. Those are something that the utilities department can allow underneath power lines. The surface spaces are semi-covered spaces with vines that are growing on the structure. And the applicant did look at some other alternatives here. Did look at a basement alternative in the past. You can see on the left, actually the project would take access for surface spaces along Montedero on the side street, as well as the alley to get ramped down. And you can see with the ramp meeting the code, there's not really sufficient backup space to those spaces. And then even if you look at on the surface, you still don't even have 50% shading there on the site. So they're still problematic, even when you look at a basement alternative. Probably could have pushed them in different ways here to see maybe different configurations, but it is challenging given that on a basement that leads to an alley. The cars coming up that ramp have their headlights into the adjacent residential. That's pretty tough. And the trash space here probably isn't sufficient on the surface here. There's a lot of challenges for having this space be alternative. And then just kind of building on what the Bobset building looks like across from the alley. You can see it's a two-story residential building. There's some doors that access the alley. There's a courtyard in the middle that you don't really see here. And then the alley is really 20 feet wide. You can see the utility pole in that picture. And then on the other side of the picture, the graphic, you can see sort of how the project puts all its massing along El Camino Real. It's consistent with the South El Camino Real guidelines, and putting the parking stepping down to the alley, sort of having that buffer with the residential units. This is really important if we go down the variance path. This is the first finding that needs to be made, and it's because of special circumstances applicable to the subject property, including but not limited to the size, shape, topography, location, or its surroundings. And so it's not just the lot itself and maybe something that's wrong with it. Like a lot of times you think of there's a huge grove of trees or large boulders that we can't move. I mean, it's also its location and surroundings. That the strict application of requirements and regulations prescribed in this title substantially deprive such property of privileges enjoyed by other property. And I think that's where we've tried to make those findings in your packet today. And hopefully my presentation will demonstrate that. Some other things about the project we have is a below market rate housing. Project will make an in lieu payment of that. That number is 0.45 units, so that it's a fractional unit, therefore we're subject to the in lieu payment. Mechanical lift parking also is a condition regarding the operations and maintenance in case there's a breakdown. And then just going into some of the materials, and the applicant can probably go a little bit more into this. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at the materials at the display case, or they were available online as well. But they're using some concrete, which in they're using a slag, which is more of a sustainable type of concrete. And there's 3-form cladding, a different type of material. The glass railings and their application of it here. There's some glass overhangs that are being used as well. The long-term bicycle parking, you can see the picture at the right they're using. It's kind of a neat looking one. Looks pretty durable. And some of the wood they're using for the trellis that's over the parking, as well as the bench that's being provided along Montero. And then some of the roofing material used for the trash enclosure, as well as same material for part of the parking trellis cover. There's a rock wall that's on the side of Montero, as well as going along the rear of the alley. And then some of the concrete masonry block that's used for the structure of the trash enclosure and the property line wall. And then you have the mechanical equipment screen that's being used on the roof, as well as some of the planters that are being used along the alley portion, and also along the front of El Camino. And then this is the materials board. I think of the 3-form cladding. I believe one of the applicants has, they want to show that in their presentation today. And then this is just one of the findings of the architectural review is the sustainability. The project uses concrete that has slag, which is a sustainable material. There are solar panels on the roof. Uses steel framing, which is a renewable resource. Operable doors and windows, and that 3-form cladding doesn't require paint, I believe, so it's a little different. And then for CEQA, we are currently in circulation with a mitigated negative declaration document being circulated from May 1st through June 1st. And the impacted topics include, they're all construction related, air quality, biological resources, cultural resources, some hazardous resources, and noise, more specifically the vibration. And all these mitigations proposed can reduce these impacts to less than significant. So in conclusion, we want to conduct a public hearing. The project did respond to the ARB comments. The project is consistent with the architectural review findings. We want to consider those variance requests by the applicant, and we want to complete the CEQA process. So the recommendation is to review and consider the initial study and mitigate negative declaration. And I recommend approval of the project to the Director of Planning and Development Services based on the findings and subject to approval. So that concludes my presentation. If you have to answer any questions, the applicant has their presentation, which I will operate. And then we'll go ahead and get to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Sheldon. Does any board member have a question for staff?
Yeah, I have one.
Go ahead, David.
The enclosure for the long-term parking in the back, is that a requirement for the retail or the residential portion of the building?
It's for both. They're both combined there.
Okay.
Any other questions? I would like to ask one question then, Sheldon. When you're measuring the shading as a percentage of the parking lot area, are you including the area of the stacked parking that's actually underneath the building? The code seems to say you should take the area of the surface parking and shade half of that. Are you including, which area are you including when you make that measurement?
We're including the driveway and the surface parking areas.
I asked this because on the applicant's drawings, it seemed that they were including a much larger area for what the surface parking area was. Can you say what percentage is actually shaded with the application right now? To what extent are we asking for a variance?
Yeah, I think if we look at that sheet, we're showing like 200 square feet of the parking lot being shaded. So it's a very small percentage. I know they have another exhibit, but they're basically that 200 square feet is in this area here. These areas, they're not included. These other areas are not included. So really, it's a very small area that's included.
But can you say what the percentage is? The code says they have to be 50% shaded. What percent shaded are they right now?
Yeah, I'd have to look at that sheet, and I think while the applicant is giving their presentation, I just have to do the math here. But again, it's like they're only doing this. This is the only part that's shaded. So we just need to take this area here, and this. I mean, it's very, very small. It's not very much, but I can get that for you.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? Osma, no? Then can we go on and see?
I have a question about that issue, Peter. I thought it was stated in the text somewhere that it's the shading is about 26 or 27% relative to the 50% requirement.
That's the number I'm looking for. Sheldon, it seems hard to see how that would be 25% on this drawing in front of us.
Yeah, I think if you give us a minute, we can find that number for you, maybe after the applicant presents.
That's great, Jody. Yeah, just at some point as we discuss this. With that, can we move on to the applicant presentation? Do we have the applicant here, Vin? Could you get them on board for us, please?
Yeah, so I believe the applicant is Pratima and Joe. So I'll go ahead and promote those two to panelists so that way they can speak and also share their presentation.
I hope they speak clear. And Vin, I can't hardly understand you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me now?
Hear you, but you're still not clear in my
I
hearing.
can hear you pretty well.
Okay, and it's me.
Yeah, maybe consider raising volume.
Yes, no, I'm fine on volume.
Peter, you're muted.
Joe and Pratima, I see you have joined the meeting as panelists. If you can connect your audio, you can speak.
Welcome, Architect Palomo.
Yes.
Joe, there seems to be a lot of echoing on your side. Are you perhaps maybe running the meeting on TV or another computer, perhaps?
Sounds like two sources of audio.
Yeah. There's some.
It looks like Joe just exited. Pratima, are you there?
Yeah, so since we both of us are in one room, so I will be sharing same like my presentation and my mic, so we don't have echo.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Please take your time until you're ready. The technology can be challenging and we're very eager to hear your presentation.
Yes, thank you. So can Joe log in after my presentation again? Will you let him?
Well, he can log in now. He just needs to turn off his microphone or mute himself, essentially, if you guys are in the same room.
Yeah, we're in the same room.
Yeah, hold on. Then I will unmute the mic and you can continue.
Yeah, just give us a second. Can they hear us now?
49, yes.
They can hear us now?
Yeah, they can hear us.
You want me to start it off then?
Please go ahead whenever you're ready. I think we can all hear you fine.
Give us just a few seconds and then I'll start. You can hear me, correct?
I can hear you fine. You will have 10 minutes whenever you start.
Okay. That's the train.
I can hear the train as well.
Yeah. So we're almost ready. I think, ready for doing? Oh yeah.
Let's go over the presentation and then we try to log in that camera. And if we want to show mock-up.
Nice.
So this is what we will do. We'll continue with our presentation and during question answer session, we'll keep our camera on. So we will be able to show you the mock-ups of the material samples we made. Are you able to hear me? Yeah.
We can hear you. Yeah, we can't see you yet. I'm assuming you guys have just kept your camera off for now.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So good morning, respected ARB review members, city officials, and everybody who has joined us at this virtual hearing. My name is Pratima Shah and I'm the project architect. We, Joe and I, would like to thank city officials and Sheldon Assing, with whom we work closely on this project. We appreciate their detailed staff report and informative.
Excuse me, could you state and spell your name for the record, please?
Yes, first name Pratima, P as in Paul, R Robert, A Apple, T Tom, I M Mary, A Apple, last name Shah, S-H-A-H.
Thank you very much.
We would like to thank ARB members for thorough review of our design proposal, valuable comments and suggestions. We really appreciate them. We have reviewed and considered each and every suggestion by the board, the city departments, and have responded in our revised design proposal. I would like to begin my presentation. Next, please. I would like to begin my presentation with the existing site conditions. Sheldon, yeah. The size of the lot is 60 feet by 104 feet. That is about 6,252 square feet. It is a standard size of a lot for a single family home and a substandard lot for a multi-family mixed use building. The lot has been vacant for past 30 years and because of the soil was contaminated and had to go through the extensive process of remediation. Now the site has clean title from the County of Santa Clara. Next. The design proposal that we are presenting today has evolved after considering different design programs and working with the consultants, city officials, and our clients. I would like to summarize the design proposals we submitted previously. Our first formal design application was in August 2017, where we proposed 3-story mixed-use building with 2 office spaces and 2 residential units. There was a conflicting requirement of the zoning code for this property. The CN district only allowed multifamily residential districts. That means 3 or more units, and the permitted residential density only permitted 2 residential units, and we had proposed 2. So there was conflict in the zoning requirements itself. We explored other design. Next. We explored other design options for the program, like 2-story office building only. But an office building has had more stringent setback requirements, such as 20 feet from Matadero Avenue. That's approximately like 1/3 of the site. And we also would have lost the opportunity of adding most desirable housing in the city. We tried option of a basement with a ramp a third level of mechanical lift in a pit. Both options were discarded because of the remediated soil condition and to keep the excavation to minimum. At this point, we had many constraints and we were really concerned about the economical feasibility of the project. Next. And that's when the housing incentive plan was announced by the city council, which helped us a lot during this process. The following incentives, like first one, increased residential FAR, then increased reduced car parking requirement, like one car parking space for 1 bedroom unit instead of 1.5, and more than 50% site coverage is permitted. We were able to take advantage of these incentives and propose the design, which works for clients as well as city. Next. There is no major change in the design program from the previous proposal. The proposal includes 2 office spaces around 2,374 square feet and 3 residential units around 4,500 square feet. In the previous proposal, a variance was requested for 5 feet perimeter landscaping along the parking lot. We have fulfilled this requirement by adding 8-foot landscape strip at the end of the driveway along the neighboring property. With 2 trees, shrubs, creepers on the boundary wall, and permeable pavers, this strip creates a beautiful landscape space and a visual relief in the parking area. In order to create this green oasis in the parking lot, we had to reduce 1 car parking space from the mechanical car lift system, resulting in reduction in office square footage. Next. The design proposal includes 10 car parking spaces with mechanical vehicular lifts, while 3 car parking spaces are on grade. These on-grade car parking spaces are mainly for commercial portion of the building, as David asked the question. Residential will have designated parking in the car lifts. The bicycle parking has been relocated from the alley to the space in front of a unused bay of the car lift system. During the previous ARB meeting, there was a comment or discussion and concern expressed about the alley streetscape. Relocating bicycles at new position not only makes the bicycle parking safer, but also provides a continuous landscape strip along the alley. There is a 5-feet easement on the alley for overhead electrical lines. Though we have this restriction, we feel we have created a design solution which beautifies the alley. 4 Japanese maple trees, removable planters demarcate the boundary and beautify the alley, plus creates a desirable buffer between the alley and the parking area. Next, another change we are proposing for the shading of on-grade parking, surface parking. Earlier design proposal included a continuous standing seam metal roof for the car parking area. In this proposal, we have a combination of standing seam metal roof over the parking area and ipe wood trellis or pergola covered with creepers over the aisles. This combination roof will provide required shading for the parked cars. The trellis and the vines, which is an interesting landscape element, will create beautiful views for the users and the neighbors, as well as reduce the heat island effect. Next. These are the pictures of the model which show the view from the alley, and you will be able to see the difference, this small little change we made in the alley streetscape. Now we have a continuous street of landscape. Next is the rendering, which shows a corner view from Matadero Avenue and the alley. And if you have taken drive through this alley, you will agree with me that this will be one of the beautiful corners on that alley. Next. The next couple of slides show the revisions we made to the floor plans. Since we reduced 1 car parking space, we had to reduce office square footage on the 2nd floor by around 150 square feet. We have compensated this reduction in office square footage by adding more square footage to the residence on the 2nd floor. Next. On the 3rd floor, we have reduced size of the 2 terraces, which were closer to the neighboring buildings, and have increased the square footage of residence number 3. We are still able to fulfill requirement of 150 square foot of open space per residential unit and overall landscape or open space, as we have added more landscaping on ground floor. Next. Now I will proceed with response to the ARB comments. We have submitted a virtual material board which has pictures of the material samples, brief specifications, construction details for few materials, and pictures of the materials in use at our previous project. A physical material board was submitted at the previous ARB hearing and now at the plaza. We have a mock-up of three-form wall and a three-form edge detail and a connection detail of steel frame and glass or three-form panel. I will show these mock-ups once I connect to the camera. Next. This is the picture of the mock-up and the slides. Next. There was a concern expressed on how building responds to its surrounding residential neighbors and location of the trash enclosure. As explained previously in the design, it has a beautiful landscape perimeter strip along the valley. The view of the parking is screened with movable planters, Japanese maple trees, and rock walls. The standing seam metal roof and ipe trellis with creepers form an interesting roof pattern. The entry of the trash enclosure is in the front of the staircase of one of the residential building, and it's not right in front of the door. Trash enclosure is fully enclosed and with overhead rolling shutter. The vehicular entry and exit to the site is from Matador Avenue, thus it reduces impact on the alley traffic. Next. As mentioned in the previous hearing by the city staff, today's ARB discussion focuses on the South El Camino Real guidelines and compliance to it. One of the main concern was about guideline 4.1.5 articulated facade, base, body, and roof. As per the guidelines, building does have an articulated facade and expresses the use of its space. For ground floor office use, the building has exposed concrete column frame and a concrete slab with glass walls. This maintains the rhythm of the neighboring storefronts. The middle floor office use has an overhanging balcony with solar screening landscape elements, a vertical garden, which is a distinct feature and relates to the building next to the neighboring building. The top floor residence is cladded with three-form and does not reveal the structural system. The residence is recessed 8 feet from El Camino Real and 16 feet in the corner to reduce the massing of the building and relate to the context. So from the pedestrian view, the glass guardrail for the terrace is more visible and acts as a parapet and relates to the two-story neighboring building. The building uses similar architectural elements of the neighboring buildings like storefront, balconies, parapets, and forms a strong connection with them. As per ARB members,
You're at 10 minutes now. Could you wrap this up within a minute, please?
Yes, I'm on second last slide, so I will be able to finish. Thank you. As per ARB members' suggestions, we explore a couple of design solutions, and we think the proposed is the best one as it satisfies the intent of the guideline and forms strong connection with the neighboring building. Next. The main important variance issue about the site is 50% parking lot with trees is requirement for surface parking. I feel we have a unique situation here where 13 of 10 cars, that is 75% of the cars, are parked in the vehicular system and 3 are parked on the grade with shared driveway. The code does not address this situation. There are 13 cars parked. If all 13 cars were parked on the surface, it would have covered 3,800 square feet. And that is almost, we have reduced 50% of surface parking area requirement. Code intends to reduce heat island effect by providing shading in the parking with trees. 75% car parking is under the building and remaining is covered with landscape elements and trees. Also, it is located in the north side of the property, so part of the driveway will always be shaded as shown in the picture of the model. With this, I would like to conclude my presentation. We tried our best to respond to each and every comment, and we are really satisfied with the proposal we have, and we hope ARB recommends this too.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Do we have any questions from the board of the applicant?
Yes.
Go ahead, Ozma.
Well, I wanted to ask, it sounded like there was some mock-ups of the material that we were going to see via video. Is the board interested in seeing that?
Okay.
I am.
Okay, I'll turn the video on and show it.
Can you tell me how long is this video?
It's not long. I'm just going to show the mock-up by camera.
Okay, at the request of Board Member Thompson, we'll look at the video. Thank you.
It's not a video, it's just their video, like their camera, so we can see it.
Are you able to see, Osman?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the mock-up of the wall with tree form. So we have a steel frame and Joe, maybe you can explain it. Mock-up.
So is that concrete color and that three-form brown color correct in terms of what will be used on this project?
So this mock-up we made with the material that was available at the workshop. Because it's a special order, exact color sample of the three form was submitted at the ARB meeting.
It looks very similar to the one that I saw on the material board. I mean, the material board one maybe looks a little darker.
My material sheet gives exact specifications of the color, and that matches with the true color if you see the material sheet, virtual material sheet.
Yeah, I went and I saw the material board.
Yeah, and I have to show the other mock-ups too.
I'm interested in seeing the corner.
Yeah. If you see, this is like 90-degree corner. This is one of the ways to the C-complex is at the edge, meter edge. And the third mock-up is the plate, glass, steel frame, and metal plates.
Can you okay, can you get closer to the corner, please?
Which one?
Corner.
The not that corner, the three-form mock-up corner. Is that a edge banding of metal?
No, it's not metal. It's C-complex. It's polymer caulking material.
Yeah. And we've used this on several projects. I want to quickly say thank you for your time with the ARB. I served a couple terms and I understand the effort and I really appreciate that. So I just wanted to interject that.
Thank you, Joe Belomo.
And you're familiar with the corner at University, those three, city parking structure.
Yeah.
Okay, we're asking questions. Osman, does that answer your question?
It does. I did have one more question. A lot of my questions actually got answered by the staff report. So thank you, Sheldon, for a really thorough report.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the mechanical screen. I noticed on the material board there were two materials that were called mechanical screen, and I just wanted to clarify why. Like, I just was a little confusing. I thought the sheet was the mechanical screen, but then there's another sort of thicker.
So Pratima's showing you an example. Can you see it?
Yeah. Okay, so is that other object just the attachment then for the mechanical screen? It just look like two objects. Yeah, I can see that.
So we're not able to hear Pratima's voice clearly, and I don't know if we have a specific question for her.
I was just asking the architect, whoever can answer it.
So maybe state that again, Osman. It's not clear. I want to keep moving.
Okay. I was just confused by the material board about the mechanical screen, but if we can confirm that what we just saw will be the mechanical screen, then that answers my
Osman,
question.
quick explanation. There were 2 screen samples submitted. The perforated stainless steel is for bike enclosure, and aluminum sheet with a big perforated hole in the middle was for mechanical screen.
I see. Okay. Thank you. That's much more clear.
Okay. Anything
Okay.
else?
Nope.
Any other questions from other members of the board? Very well. Vin, don't we have a public comment? At this point, I'd like to open the meeting to public comments. Vin, what speaker cards do we have, please?
Yes, so we currently have 3 speakers. First would be Timothy Maloney, followed by Shannon, and then followed by Sorensen. If there's anyone else here who wishes to speak, please raise your hand now. So up first will be Timothy.
And Vin, can we please mute the architects at this time?
Sure, 1 second.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome to our meeting. Please state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Timothy J. Maloney. That's TIMOTHYMALONEY. I live on Matadero, just a few doors down from this project. I've been on Matadero for over 40 years. And my only question is to the board, I guess, about what are the plans of the city in general in the neighborhood for regulating parking. I've watched the population of cars on my street increase over 40 years, and the population has gone way up. This project it appears to be taking care of parking, but there are going to be people visiting the property that will park in the neighborhood. The city has had to introduce signs not far away in this neighborhood restricting oversized vehicles, as you all know. And I wonder how long is it going to be before we have regulated parking, limited times, residential permits and things like that. I assume that the architectural board knows things like this. I thought this was a good time to try to find out. So I'll yield the rest of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maloney. Our next speaker, Vin, please.
Yes, next speaker will be Shannon. Shannon, I have unmuted you. Can you please unmute yourself on your computer and then you may speak.
Yep, my name is Shannon Marquardson, SHANNON, last name MARQUARDSON. I live in the residential building just behind the alley, which is next to the proposed site. My big concern is, given the noise report that was online, it seems like there will be 9 to 10 hours of construction 6 days a week for 18 months. Particularly frustrating because all of us are working from home. So I don't know when this project is slated to start, but that would be completely prohibitive to living so close to this construction site. I know the estimates are that the alley is very narrow, and that it indeed is true. And so I'm just very concerned about the noise during construction. Again, given that we're all home 24 hours a day. So I'd love to understand the clear mitigations for the noise impact and how we'll be able to continue to work from home if this were to start soon. And also clarify, if we can, when this project would be planned to begin, so that I have advance notice to move out if needs be. And that's all I have to comment about.
Thank you very much, Shannon. Vin, our next speaker, please.
Okay, our last speaker will be Sorensen. If there's anyone else who wants to speak, please raise your hand now. Sorensen, I have unmuted you.
Welcome, Sorensen. If you could state and spell your name for the record, you'll have 3 minutes, please.
Sorensen, I see you have unmuted your microphone. You can speak.
Yeah, actually, it's not Sorensen. Sorry, this is Joseph Kung. I probably have the Zoom label. I'm not familiar with Zoom. I'm actually one of the owners on the property. I don't know if I'm allowed to speak at this moment because it's a public.
Your name for the record.
Okay, Joseph Kung, K-U-N-G. And yeah, I was a Palo Alto resident from 1984 to 1997. And I was a proud graduate from Gung High School. I love the city. And we moved away from in 1997 because my parents sold their properties. All of my parents are educators. I myself is an educator myself, but I just love the city so much. Even though I'm living in Sunnyvale now, I'm still involved with a lot of activities in Palo Alto, including I'm a volunteer for the Boy Scout Troop 5 in Palo Alto. I also provide financial assistance for the suicide prevention programs for the Palo Alto high school kids, as well as I do 2 volunteer work for the Mitchell Park Library twice a week. And so I always want to get back to Palo Alto. I would like my daughter, who is 10 years old now, to continue to be a Palo Alto resident and be a proud graduate from Gung High School as a part of Titan. So for us, you know, it takes a long time. We own that land. Our family have owned that land since the late 1970s. And I grew up from that spot, so I know how ugly the whole neighborhood was around that, you know, not ugly, but in terms of old buildings. I'm not much of an artist. I'm not much, I don't understand the architect. I just like to have an opportunity to come back to the city and be able to afford the lifestyle over there. That's why I instruct the Patima to give me some commercial income and residential income. We're not professional land developer or anything like that. We just like to make the use of the land and develop into something that we can afford to live in the area. But of course, the coach originally, you know, we have a limited budget, of course, but we, you know, I think that our architect just did a very good job giving the very limited resources they have and very small plot of land to create this marvel, in my opinion. And I wish that the board and I think that the neighbors, I heard some concerned neighbors, you know, after the project is complete, it will be great neighbors and it will be the most beautiful building in the block. So please do consider it. And I thank you and yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. To staff, I'm a little bit concerned. That last speaker was the applicant, it sounded to me.
Yes, the property owner.
Yeah, that wasn't correct, I don't think. That's not a member of the public at large then. Regardless,
Correct.
applicant, you are afforded an opportunity to rebut what members of the public said, if you'd care to address any of those things. I'm not sure I heard a whole lot to rebut, but if you'd like to, you do have the opportunity.
Let me unmute them so they can speak.
Yeah, and would you like staff to provide some answers initially?
Sure, I think that would be fair as well, Jody.
Okay.
But let's see if the applicant first wants to make a statement. I mean, they're legally required to have that opportunity, so they do.
Fatima, you can speak.
Yeah, Joe wants to speak a couple of lines. Yeah.
Okay, so quickly, this project is dear to me. I've designed mixed-use buildings on El Camino, large shopping centers on El Camino. I grew up on El Camino, so this is just great. Yeah, we also want to point out that a lot of the materials used, you see our palette, but all these materials we've used on our projects. On the University Circle, the parking structure we designed Lot R. So, you know, we're really understand materials and the beauty they provide for concrete. Having said that, we're just excited to you know,
like first project.
Yeah, first project to get approved under housing incentive plan as well. Sheldon's been super cool to work with. So I'll let, are you going to speak, Fatima?
No, that's all.
Okay.
We will proceed with question answer sessions. And if we need to explain more, do we get time at the end?
Not
Right now, yeah.
Not necessarily, but here you're just afforded an opportunity to rebut anything anyone might have said about your project. I think you've done that. Jody, could you address the two public speakers, their concerns briefly, if you could?
Yes, related to the noise question, I don't have the construction schedule, so I would need the architects to help with that answer. But related to the hours of construction, hours are limited 8 to 6 Monday through Friday, and then 9 to 6 on Saturdays. No construction on Sundays and holidays. And I don't know if the architect has the potential construction schedule.
Potential construction will start
I
in,
think we say we're going to meet the standards for construction. I want to keep our meeting moving along.
There was just a question about when construction might start.
Sorry, yes. When will construction start?
spring 2021.
Thank
Okay.
Thank you very
And
much.
then related to parking, Mr. Maloney's question. So the Office of Transportation is really in charge of those sorts of things, as well as Public Works. On a 20-foot alley, there would not be parking allowed because that's just wide enough for two-way traffic. On the main streets, there is potentially room for parking, but we probably need to take that issue up later on as part of that's more of a citywide question than a project question. And so if Mr. Maloney wanted to email me or something, I'd be happy to follow up on that.
Thank you, Jody. With that, we'll close the public testimony part of this meeting, and we'll bring the item back to the board. And Ozma is going to start out our discussion today. So Ozma, the floor is yours.
Now I kind of regret agreeing to that. Okay, well, I appreciate all of the responses that we received from our comments before. It was a little concerning initially that the project hadn't changed at all because, and I still feel this way, that the base, middle, and top element of the El Camino design guidelines is sort of still missing. And I took a lot of time to try and understand the analysis that was given for that. And I sort of see a little better now how you are defining the base, middle, and top. I think it's still, I don't know. I'm not gonna, I'm trying to see how strongly I feel about this. And then the other concern that I originally had was that the material board had this sort of dark color for the 3-form resin. And initially when I was looking at the elevations, it looked like it was 2 colors of concrete. I realize now that it's the 3-form and the concrete, and that the 3-form will be a lot darker, and there is a lot of it. And that color, I don't know that that color works in this area. I would ask the board to sort of consider, and I am looking at the other precedent buildings that were pointed out on University. In those buildings, it's sort of less prevalent, I would say, than it is in this particular design. And again, in the renderings, it looks really light, but the color itself is actually really dark. And so I'm not sure about that choice as it relates to this context. Other than that, I do like the terracing, and I think that is effective. And so I'm going to leave it there. I think there's a lot of nice things that were done with the landscaping to sort of, deal with some of the constraints. And so I'm gonna leave my comments there for now. I'm curious to hear what the rest of the board has to say.
Thank you, Ozma. David, would you like to follow up, please?
Who's next?
David, you're next.
I'm next. Okay. Yes, I'm happy to respond at this point because Cosmo brings up the major issue, I think, here. But first, I'd like to say, I think it's really important that we as a board here recognize what's happening. This is a major, major project now, even tiny as it is, on El Camino. It's happening in an area where we're hoping that there'll be some development happening along with it, and some of the rest of the block can be significantly improved. In fact, some of the whole area of South El Camino, that particular node in study, El Camino report, El Camino guidelines, needs to be addressed. It's a very weak area of Palo Alto right now. I too went back and looked at the guidelines and really found those guidelines to be lacking because they're kind of caught up in something that's probably about 10, 15 years old right now. Talking about buildings as base, middle, top. You know, is it a base foundation and then the middle is the two-story building and the top is a piece of a cornice? You know, if you look back in the examples that are given in that report, they all have a kind of a masonry building with a corner treatment of a little element that projects forward. Well, that's absolutely wouldn't work in a place like this. And that's why I'm kind of totally intrigued by the way this design solves so many problems, especially on that El Camino corner. We've got narrow sidewalks and a turning issue that is difficult from Matadero into El Camino. And this building addresses that very directly. Some of the earlier schemes, which I really discovered for the first time, I didn't realize that in the previous review, we hadn't seen the previous scheme. Again, the improvement from an entry in the middle of the building to a corner entry is significant. And if you think about that idea of what that corner should be, I think this is a prime example of what it ought to be. So I think we as a board should recognize that this is a significant project to have now, not to put it off and wait for the future. I don't mind reviewing, as Osmo suggests, the colors and materials by committee, but I'd like to see this project proceed because I'd like to see that part of El Camino have a new, inviting description of what could happen to that part of the city. So I've said it pretty much about the old guidelines. Let's have new guidelines for what buildings should be. And this is a good example. There's a purity about it. It even reminds me of the Greek temples in a way, the regularity of the column structure, except that it's modern with the push and the pull. It answers all of those issues that I think that we had in the beginning about articulation of facade, balconies, terrace, the importance of the corner, entry, the second floor overhang, relating to the buildings next to it by setting the residential on the top floor further back. Those are important statements being made on El Camino. And the material palette is very, very simple. Just a few elements of that construction are being expressed here. And they set off that wonderful rigidity of the expressed framework by having glass against those column structures or the slab structure. It's a purity that I think, construction purity that for me is very important to express without any frivolity to it and any extra pieces. It is what it is. It does what it does. It's a structural expression that's turned into a piece of architecture by the push and pull of the facade. And I hope that the rest of the board would go along with that idea. You know, when we look at our own findings, and I think whoever writes the answers, if it's Sheldon, I congratulate him. The wording's always very well done. I think this building kind of addresses all of our issues quite well. I don't find it missing on any of them. Except, of course, there is the issue of the variance. And on a tiny little lot, where you can place another tree? It's just not possible. They've done as best they could. They've covered the parking on the outside rather well, and yet light penetrates that. I didn't really even look at that until just now. And I think it's very nice the way the shadow line will work from the open areas of the cover over the parking. I think they've solved a lot of the problems with the very back of the site as best they could with the limitation of the electrical lines above. The garbage is very remote from where it might be for a residential building as well, but it does work there. So small walk across the parking lot, I guess, if you get to that. And the electrical connection with the transformer there, it satisfies. So they've made those changes to the back of the site that I think were absolutely necessary. And they made the changes relative to the planting area. I don't like the bicycle locker there. I wish it could be stuck somewhere else. I would hope that maybe it would be inside in the stairwell where you have plenty of extra room, since that long run of stair also leaves a space below it that might be used for those bicycles. I'd like to see that cleaned up in some way. In fact, I don't see why, if you have that area back there, it has to be an enclosure, because that doesn't enhance that part of the parking lot at all. So I'm coming down very much in favor of this project, and hoping that the board will agree with me. We can get something started on how it can be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Grace, would you care to take us further, please?
Yes, I just want to thank staff, Sheldon, for the complete report. It is very clear to me that this is a project that I would recommend for approval to move forward. I want to just go over a few of the comments, since I didn't attend the first meeting, but I carefully reviewed what our group here had requested. I want to commend the applicant for the very careful study that has occurred for a number of years now, and sharing those options with us. That was not required. However, my sense is that this is a site that has been studied very carefully. There's been multiple diagrams and explored. At this last meeting, what I heard was that there were some comments related to the alley adjacency, and then discussion of the variance. And there was some about the materials and site diagram. Well, to go back just to his first point, I believe this is a very high quality application. I've sat on multiple terms with this board and reviewed sets. I believe that it's exemplary in terms of the site diagram and how it is treating a very much needed mixed use design with housing along El Camino Boulevard, perhaps one of the main artery in our city, in Palo Alto. And this kind of project is very much needed. I do want to talk a little bit about the site diagram in terms of the alley adjacency. I have lived on alleys, service alleys in the past, a few years back, and I believe that just, entry off of Matadero, the treatment of the landscape, the addition of trees, they will be small in the beginning. They are Japanese maples, but the addition of those trees and a high quality rock wall, the orientation of the trash enclosure, as well as how they have actually compromised on the parking, makes a lot of sense. On the variance, I do want to say that on previous terms, we have had this issue of the 50% shading. This area of the parking lot is rather small if you think about the parking lots that exist. And given the amount of shading that they are proposing and the orientation, I agree that we should move forward and vote that this project progress. And then the articulated base, body, and roof. So I think we've been calling this, what is it, top middle, bottom. And I think it is important to have a guideline for El Camino that does address articulation. I appreciate the response from the applicant and also staff in terms of recognizing that this design maintains the rhythm and pattern of the existing context, related to the palette of materials, but mostly in terms of the massing and how there is a stepping back, there is a recess on the upper floors. There's a clear storefront that marks the bottom, if we want to talk about it in this way, the middle, which again changes in the materials, and the massing steps back. And then finally, that large step back on the third floor, to me does a job in terms of really addressing that design guideline. And I think that design guideline was really talking about an unarticulated single plane that sits flat along El Camino and doesn't address what's across the street and to either side. And I think in this situation, the applicant has done some work and really studied it. So I do appreciate that. To go to the question regarding materials, I believe that the palette is highly balanced. The color for me is not, I'm not challenged by that color. I don't see it as too brown, and I do appreciate also how the palette does have some translucence with the 3-form and also the perforated metal in the screen. And I think when those come together, I actually appreciate a color that is not so bright and will provide glare and increase the mass of a wall. And so those are my comments. I just want to address what Uzma had brought up, if we would like to discuss that further. But thank you for the application, and I'll go ahead and pass the baton now.
Alex, do you want to go ahead?
Okay, Peter.
I think Peter's on mute.
Okay, should I just go?
Go ahead, Alex, please. I'm sorry if you didn't hear me earlier.
Yeah, I couldn't hear you. Sorry about that. Okay, thank you, Sheldon, and also to Joe and Pratima. I think this is, it's a really nice project. I'm generally supportive of the project, but I don't think it meets several of the findings. So why don't I just dive into that? So I think that my biggest problem is, I think, with the parking. So you have like one of the units is 1,300 square foot, 1-bedroom unit with just one parking space. So I mean, typically a 1-bedroom unit is 700 to 800 square feet. A 2-bedroom is typically 1,100 square feet. So like a 2-bedroom would have two parking spaces. I think the other units are fine, but I do have a problem with that one unit, and so I think you're short on parking. And I would just say that I think we also had a comment from the public about visitor parking, and I just wanted to mention that we changed the parking code. I guess it was last year or maybe 2 years ago, to eliminate the visitor parking spaces, and that was started at the state level and worked its way down to the city level in an attempt to make housing development more feasible. If the planning director can make a reduction for like mixed use, or if there's enough transit, then that might be possible fix, or maybe there's a different ratio of a different size unit on that second floor. I think the second finding that I can't meet is number 5 for native plants. I think that the landscaping plan is really completely unrealistic, and it's really not even complete. You're showing like bamboo. They're like several hundred varieties of bamboo. Some of them are like timber bamboo that grow 50 feet high. You have very small planters along El Camino. It seems completely undersized for most bamboo. You're showing Japanese maples on the back alley, which are not native. There are lots of options there that are utility friendly, that are local native plants. I would just throw off the top of my head, I thought of a couple. I'm not suggesting that you use them. But just as an example, there's like Ceanothus Ray Hartman. There's possibly a ribes, which is like a currant. Possibly a Western redbud, or there's a really nice Garrya elliptica, which is the silk tassel tree, which actually looks really nice. It looks kind of like a wisteria. And it's sort of in between a shrub and a tree. So yeah, it's really not ready. It's really not approvable at all. It really, I think it would benefit with a landscape architect in there. The third item is with regard to our sustainable finding, number 6. So there are a couple things in there that I think we should strike out. I do support the overall use of the concrete, the modified concrete, but in the staff report, you're saying that steel is a renewable material, and it's just not. You're using iron ore, which is mined. It's very energy intensive. If you want to include the steel, I would just say it's a desirable material for recycling. That's partly because it's so energy intensive to make. Also, the staff report says that the 3-form is renewable, and I think that is not true. There are some specific 3-forms that are better than others, but typically they're using pre-consumer recycled content in there, not post-consumer. So it doesn't really meet, it's not exactly meeting LEED standards. Although I will acknowledge that 3-form does have some sustainable practices that make it better than other materials. And then I think the other thing that I would mention too is, it was mentioned that there are like photovoltaics up on the roof. And I just want to caution staff about that. We've had lots of other projects that have promised that. And then when I go look at like aerial photos of the completed projects, there's nothing on there. We've been burned in the past, and so I would sort of prefer not to do that if possible. And let's see. So I think those are my 3 things. On design, I think we should require the actual perforated metal to be specified. We've had problems in the past where architects have specified perforated metal that was too open, and that you can actually see right through it into the mechanical equipment. So it sort of defeats the purpose of the screen. I think that I think Pratimesh had shown a photo in there that showed a very low percentage opening. And I think that's fine, but I didn't see that in the set, and I didn't see anything specified in the drawing set. So I think that does need to be followed up. So that's what I have. I think the variance findings are up to the director. I think I don't have any issues. I don't necessarily have any issues with that. But I think the parking is a major issue for me. I do support the housing incentive program, and I do support reducing parking for units to make them more affordable. But this is just it's too much. Having like a 1,300 square foot bedroom with 1 parking is just is too much for me. So I can't recommend the project today. So that's all that I have, Peter.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much for the statement. I'd like to point out to my colleagues that our job is to enforce the codes and the guidelines as they stand. And a reason for a variance is not that the application is complete, or David, that we like the building or the design. It's a beautiful design. I think all of us would agree with that. But I tend to share Alex's opinion. I think that there's some serious issues with the parking on this project. Not even getting into the parking counts, which is really up to the staff and the transportation department. I think it's awfully tight the way you fit into these spaces. That the last spot on the stackers requires you to, in a 25-foot wide space, make a complete 90-degree turn and pull into that fairly precisely with these stackers. And then to get out, you have to, I don't see how you wouldn't be juggling back and forth several times. The result is really, yeah, the parking is there. Somebody spent the money on the lift, but nobody uses it. They park on the street instead, which, as we heard from the community, is a problem. I think the answer is that the parking really should be underground. And I believe it can be done. I think we'll see in the next project a similar size site where parking is being proposed underground. We've seen other projects where it's fit. I think it really ought to be underground. It ought to be coming in from the alley, a long ramp along the side, not as conservatively drawn as the applicant did, but I sketched one out for myself and I could easily fit 13 spaces at grade underground. And I've designed parking lots like this. So to my colleagues, I say that if you can imagine having the parking taken off of the surface, so many of the issues that we're struggling with, the surface shading of the parking lot, for example, just wouldn't be there. And it would give the building more space to fit on the site. So I just think that that's an issue. I can't support it just based on the parking issue alone. And it comes back to, again, trying to fit surface parking on very small lots. I just think that that also is very visible from the street. And what we're doing is essentially saying that we want to protect the few people who live in that one building off the alley in the back from the headlights of cars. But for that, the entire city sees a surface parking area from Matadero Street, which is quite visible to everybody driving back and forth there. So I don't get it. Additionally, I had asked about the shading requirements not being met. And even without a number from staff, it's pretty obvious that there's very, very little landscape shading. If we go back to the purpose of these codes, which is, they exist and we need to follow them. We're trying to avoid a heat island effect by getting landscape green shading on paved areas in town. And I just haven't heard anybody give me a real reason why this project should be given a variance for that purpose. What is unique and special about this property that should justify that? And even to the extent that they have, I mean, they have maybe 5 or 10% shading at best. It seems to me the applicant prefers to have a metal or a built structure to provide shading, which is fine, but that's not the intent of our code. And it's not for us to find ways to get around our code. A variance has to be something unique about the property, something special about this thing, a big oak tree in the middle. And I don't see it. It's small and tight, I grant you that, but many lots in Palo Alto are small and tight, and that's not a reason for a variance. We go down a very slippery slope if we start letting variances be granted along these issues. And Alex, the board is asked to give an opinion on the variance. It's not just up to the director. And staff is very much looking to us to help them for guidance on these issues. Is this a suitable case for a variance? And I emphatically say, no, it is not. And I have not heard any presentation from staff or the applicant or my colleagues that would justify the variance on shading. Unfortunately, because I think it's a beautiful building, but nonetheless, it's not there. I also feel, as I think everyone does, it's a beautiful work of architecture. Joe Bellomo is a very talented architect. We're lucky to have him in town. He's done great buildings here, but I don't see it having a base, middle, and top. I see the presentation the applicant giving us trying to stretch that as being farcical. You just put some lines on a drawing equating the top of a plane of windows and calling that a base, a middle, and a top. I think Grace's logic's perhaps the best we could come up with to try to say that the top, the upper element of the building is just set back, and therefore the metal frame the concrete frame takes over. But again, I'm finding that, like it or not, we have this code. And the effort is to make a grand urban development out of El Camino Real. And we keep being pushed into trying to get away from that. If every building were like this, we wouldn't have an urban environment. And we all know that. You go to any number of old cities in the world, and a big part of why they're successful is because they have urban development making the majority of buildings background buildings, creating public spaces. And this building is not doing that, and we all know that. And I find myself very torn, but in the end, I feel it's our job to enforce the standards as they exist now. It's not for us, David, to just say that we want to go beyond them because they're 15 years out of date. And I'm really struggling with that.
Give me a chance to respond.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just want to put out how I feel about it. I've given a lot of thought to this, and I'm struggling with it because I respect the architect, and I think the design is really quite good. It does so many things very nicely. I do have a small detail question about how the roof eave with zero parapet whatsoever. I'd just be very curious to see how that's built at the back of the building. I'm concerned that the back and the side facing north along the massing is just not that attractively done. It seems like a flat plane, but I can't tell if that's the presentation or the real design. I'm not going to be that firm about that. And lastly, I agree with Alex completely. There is no landscaping plan. What I see on the drawing is a flowering cherry tree along the back, but then we say it's Japanese maples. I just see words like bamboo and tiny planters. There is no landscaping plan here. It's not approvable without that being thought through. It really leads me to question again whether we've really tried hard to get the shading on the parking area. And I think a landscape architect would be a good asset to this. So I'm not able to recommend approval for this today. And why don't we go back through anybody else who has anything they want to add to this? David, would you like to?
Yeah, I'd like to come back.
Please go ahead.
You know, there's some things that Alex said that I do agree with. Specifically, the landscape issues should be addressed. Probably a landscape architect could add to the teamwork there and create more appropriate plantings. Seems like it's mostly changing the type of tree, and probably some of Alex's recommendations would be workable there. In particular, I'd like to refer to some of the things that Grace said about the massing. Certainly the emphasis on the two-story kind of exposed grid of this concrete grid of this building is what makes it work as a beautiful building. You know, the setback on the third floor is really significant to emphasize that and create a context with the rest of the block to catch up at this point. I just really don't agree that we go along with penalizing this particular property for a variance, which they're doing their very best to try to accommodate to. You know, the new landscape plan allows for more tree planting in the backyard as much as they possibly could on this tiny little lot. So to compare it with a regulation that really is meant for much larger lots where you can provide parking in between, and we've noted that successful or unsuccessful in some areas, the shopping center. This one, there's no room. And they've done the very best they could. And I think if you have to weigh one thing against another, rather have this building there than defeat it and see it what it is right now, remaining in that lot, than because of a tree, because of a little bit of shading. You're not going to notice it. The building itself will create shadows in the parking area. Well, you may be correct about the difficulty of that getting into or out of the parking lot, parking spaces. You know, it happens all over the place. We will look at another building and it doesn't look like it's going to be any much easier there than it is here. And it's a very shallow building as well. So I just don't buy that argument at all. People do get into tight parking spots. And I hate the thought that every time we talk about a project, we talk about parking more than we talk about people, more than we talk about pedestrians walking on El Camino Real, turning into Matadero in a corner that is meant for pedestrians to turn in. You know, we're talking about cars. Let's get away from some of this obsession with our car. There are a lot of small cars here, you know, and somebody who can't get in can use a small car. We used to have a parking lot in Brooklyn, and we had limitations on the sizes of cars, and it worked. We made it work. So I just don't like this focus on car all the time. Let's talk about people, how they can live in this city and how they can enjoy their experience of living here. So I don't accept the variance issue as being significant. Forget about it. We give variances all over the place, all the time. Let's not dwell on that. Ozma's made some points about materials, and then Grace kind of responded to them. And I come down kind of on the side of Grace's comments about the material. I think it's okay. It's in the shadows. We've made a point about the windows on the ground floor to allow visibility of what's going on in the office space there, and they've accommodated that. I mean, it's a very, you know, aesthetics, I think, are really important here. And setting up a standard for this block with a beautiful building, that's important for us. Why not? I think we lose an opportunity if we don't approve this project today, because it's going to sit just the way it is for years. And if you find all of these little reasons to pick at it, then yes, you'll be killing it. And I don't like the ARB taking that role and responsibility here. We should accept a slight modification of history at this particular corner and make it work.
Thank you, David.
If I may, I'll step up next.
Sure.
Or Uzma, are you looking, Uzma, to speak after David?
I can go after you, Grace. No worries.
Okay. Thanks so much for everybody's comments. The one that I slightly see that I want to speak to first is the native plants and the need for a landscape plan. You know, this is a site where there are landscape opportunities. I do see my colleague Alex's point regarding native plants. And perhaps there might be an opportunity for the applicant to come back and actually just walk through a small 2-member subcommittee with the actual plants. I do see that as actually a kind of, I would support that. Regarding the variance and the parking and the guidelines related to the articulation, and then the 2 points about the PV and perforated metal. So let's just go through those. My feeling is, and I am not recommending this approval for this to move forward, the applicant's approval. Per the staff's recommendation, I agree with our planning staff because it's a beautiful building. I do have some issues with the word beautiful, for example. I think that our role is really to work with our planning staff and to present a recommendation to the director. And, you know, it would move forward. In my mind, I feel like it should. On the variance, since the staff also, our planning staff has agreed that the 50% shading is, it's okay for it to be less than that. I think that we give I would just suggest that we give the opportunity to the applicant to come back with some native plants or trees rather than the maples, which, you know, I see they do quite well here, but, you know, maybe in this situation and where they planted, there is a tree that might provide more shade, slightly more shade. I think that the rock wall and the landscape treatment on the part of the applicant is a very positive gesture. I do think it's attainable to recommend that it move forward for review of that variance, perhaps with a landscape plan that would come through the subcommittee. On the parking, again, I agree with our planning staff that the parking requirements are sufficient here. This is a mixed use building with housing on El Camino on a 60 by 100-foot lot. To achieve this, which is so much what we need along El Camino, and this is a vast improvement to this site, I feel comfortable moving forward with the parking as it has been presented. And, you know, I do acknowledge the thinking behind the 1,500 square feet and one space. You know, to achieve housing on El Camino, there does need to be an acknowledgement that we need to review each case by case. And in my opinion, I'm very comfortable with the parking as presented. I also acknowledge that sometimes it's harder or slightly more challenging to move within parking lots. And you know, my feeling is this occurs in other sites and other situations that I have seen and other sets that I've reviewed. So I support the parking and the surface layout as presented. And then in terms of the PVs and perforated metal, I think that's further down the road, and I have full confidence that our staff, that our city staff will be able to work with an applicant. And I appreciate that the acknowledgement that in the past there have been challenges, and I don't see that as a way to kind of derail this approval or moving it forward. And then most importantly, this whole guidelines of articulation and meeting that. Again, I just want to maybe revisit that a little bit if we want to discuss it together. My feeling is that the storefront along the front does actually articulate a bottom, and then on the office at the second floor, there is a change in materials. There also is an in and out of the building. So it has to do, I think, when we talk about articulation, it is massing, it also is materials and how those actually work together in my mind. And then the top, I believe, is probably the most compelling, right? That there's actually a recess. But if we want to talk about just how it works together, I actually felt what the applicant presented was compelling and did actually speak to that bottom, middle, and top. And so if we want to maybe discuss that together, we could do that. I mean, I don't know if that's the main issue. I'd love to hear from other board members. And so I'll go ahead and mute myself right now.
Thank you.
My
Great.
turn?
Asma, why don't you speak up?
Okay, I will try to go in order. With the parking note, I'm sort of finding myself agreeing with board member Hirsch. It is a little frustrating to be talking about parking all the time when we really should be talking about architecture. So I'm actually, I think in terms of all the things that this board looks into, parking is sort of not one of the things that I like to focus on. I like to focus on the materials and stuff. I do want to defer to my board members' expertise and planning's expertise. So I'm actually going to refrain on commenting on the parking, but I do think that if board member Liu feels like it's a problem and Landscape doesn't feel like it's a problem, we'll see. I think that discussion is worth fleshing out a little bit more. It is extremely concerning about the landscape plan that it's not approvable. And for that reason, I also probably will not recommend approval. Probably. I don't feel myself in a place where I could recommend approval for this project. And even the notes that board member Liu made on sustainability are pretty on point. So I would agree with all of those changes. Sorry, going back to the parking, kind of pushing the project to park underground, I think would benefit the streetscape and benefit the architecture greatly. So I would support pushing the applicant to consider that further, especially given, as we'll see in the next project, that there is sort of also a tight situation. And I do think the streetscape benefits from having less parking on site. I'm going to talk about materials really quick. Can I share my screen? Share, Balte?
Yes, that's fine. Please do that.
Okay. So I'm just sharing. Let me know if you can see it. Nods. Yes, you can see it. Great. So I just want to point out this thing that I was talking about. So this material here, this brown 3-4 material, is what I believe makes up all of this stuff all of this stuff and all of this stuff. And so I just want to point out how deceptive this rendering is, that it's really going to be much more punchy rather than sandy. And I sort of disagree, Board Member Lee, that the materials change from base to middle to up, because these two materials are consistent the whole way. And I think it's important, even in the elevations, these are really showing kind of like a light sandy color, but they're not a light sandy color. And that's not to say that, sandy is better. I'm not saying that. I just would like a bit more transparency in this application as to what this material is and how it will really look on the street. And so to go back to the base, middle, and top, I do appreciate Board Member Lee's comments. It actually sort of gave me a bit more perspective, but I do think the top, the roof, is very unarticulated, and I appreciate the setback. I still really like the terracing effect. So it does, make the facade at El Camino seem smaller than it really is. But I do think there is some work to be done up here in terms of adding scale and articulation. So I will stop there, because I think that responded to all of the points that we've all been discussing.
Thank you, Ozma. I have to admit, I find your comment about the 3-4 materials spot on, and I'm glad we shared your screen. It's dramatic, the difference from the rendering, and I think you're right. We need to see something that shows what that color being much browner and redder like that across the whole building will only tie the 3 floors together, and that might be an issue. To Board Member Lee, I say that I think we have to be careful, assuming staff will monitor things like the kind of metal perforations. I don't think they look at that too much. It says perforated metal, there's submitted perforated metal, it goes through. It's really up to us to do as Alex suggested and get a recommendation, get a specification now that we can hang on. The staff is really looking to us for that kind of guidance. They're repeatedly just asking, and we fail in our job if we don't, at this point in a project, ask for more specificity. With that, I guess, unless Alex, do you have anything you want to add to the conversation? I'm not looking for a motion now, but I just want to make sure everybody has a chance to talk.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add. I would just say that on the base, middle, top issue, I think it does meet the minimum requirements of the context-based criteria and the El Camino design guidelines. And I would say, I think that there's room for improvement, but I think at the end of the day, if it really push came to shove, I think that part is approvable.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I'd like to then chime in that I think I align most closely with Alex's thought. And I think the base, middle, top articulation thing somehow does work on this building ultimately, maybe with a few color issues that Ozma was talking about, but I think Grace's argument holds water, that there's something to that setback on the top, which really makes the railing on the second level, the top of the building from that urban design standpoint, probably from a pedestrian point of view. So it probably does work ultimately. But I'd like to, again, push my colleagues that building a basement, a parking structure underground is not as difficult as everybody makes it out to be. It's a deeper hole in the ground for the foundation. It already needs a deep hole. It's done all over the place. Almost every project we see now does that. I don't want to be talking about parking, David. I want the parking out of sight, underground, and solved. I want the politicians to decide what parking is necessary for town, and applicants have to meet it. So we don't have to deal with this. We're talking about it all the time because people are pushing against it all the time, and it affects the architecture in a negative way. That's unfortunate. And it's really tough for us to always be put on that spot. Most likely we have codes that aren't entirely realistic. That's not for us to adjust. But in this case, I think, again, there's a solution to this parking problem, which just makes all these issues much less important, and that is to put it underground. And I feel strongly that's what we should be asking for. With that,
hold on.
I was going to say, David, why don't you try to make a motion? You want this approved today. Why don't you see if you can craft something that will get you there? I want to give you the opportunity, so we're all being very open here.
And Chair Balte, may I also at some point just address some of the comments that came up?
I would like to.
Okay, David, you speak first. Go ahead. I want to be sure you have an opportunity to try to get this through today, which seems to be your strong desire.
Yes, I'm not, before we do that, in response to this whole issue of parking, it's very significant that we're looking at another project that's half of the city block just about in order to get parking on the lower level. It can't be done here. And I think you will ruin the ground level of this project in the way it is done on ground level. If you put in a ramp down, and it's not going to really happen below grade unless, once again, it has a lift and a recessed parking below. And then a small floor plate that you're going to be under, whatever, how that's going. I think it's very cavalier for us to say to an architect who's been working on a project like this and has looked at that previously, to ask them to go back and look at that again. I accept Grace's comment about the way we should look at projects, not because they're beautiful, but because they satisfy the rules and regulations as they exist. But we should also recognize that there are areas where we should loosen up and accept the limitations that certain sites require. And this is one of those. Certainly a variance for a small amount of shading in a parking lot isn't something that's going to ruin the nature of Palo Alto in some grand way. And in terms of materials, I think this does a reasonable job. I sort of accept some of what Osmo was saying about choice of materials here. In the way what you showed us, I'm looking at that material and saying, if this material were here, I think it might even widen this facade more if it were warmer in tone. And after all, some of that material is in a shadow line, and when you put something in the shadow, it goes towards the blue. So color is very important, material is very important. But understand it in the lighting and the nature that you put it in as well, because that it affects it quite considerably. In terms of bottom, middle, top, I think that's the real issue here today. And I side with the way Grace kind of put it, that it really does have a bottom, middle, top. In context, it relates to the two-story. It very strongly relates to the two-story aspect of the rest of the block, and it gives us something for the future, because those buildings will definitely be changed at some point. But let's not find all the different ways in which we can shoot this one down. It's not reasonable to do so. And I think it puts the ARB in a very bad light. I think that parking should not be the priority here. I know it can be made to work. As I said, I had an extremely ridiculously tight parking spot in a parking lot in New York, and we made it work. And I don't think saying that it won't work and people will park on the street is a fair way to judge it. If the city planning, as you said, we depend upon city planning to look at these issues. Transportation looks at these issues. They've approved it to happen. We should approve it. We shouldn't use it because we don't have a right to do that. It's really their responsibility to say that the parking will work, and they tell us the parking will work. Shading, they say that's one that's an open issue. And okay, then yes or no, do we accept it or not? I accept it because it's such a small lot. Nothing is going to make it miserable looking, and the actual shading of the cars that are in the open will have a wonderful pattern of light penetrating through them. So how can you object to it on that basis? Perhaps the only one might be bottom, middle, top, and I think that at least two of us agree that it's well done. And then if it is well done, then it answers the issue that El Camino got. I really think it's important for us to approve this project today. I can make a motion to accept. However, with the limitations that Alex mentioned, and the fact that the city also accepts parking the way it is, Alex, it's their job to do that, not ours. Anybody else? Speak to it.
Have you finished, David?
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to cut you off, but Grace, did you want to chime in once more? Great. You're still muted. Oh, Ozma.
Thank you. I don't want to make this a longer meeting than it is. I want to be productive and, offer comments to the applicant that is productive, and also acknowledge the staff's efforts in working for a while with this applicant. And I just want to say a couple of things. So, thank you for this, your discussion. I do think, when I mentioned the perforated metal, absolutely, it is we should comment on these materials. I just simply wanted to note that there's a materials board, and often the city will go back to that materials board. And I believe there's samples that they've already actually shown in a few sets. And so my confidence was there, but I do not want to say in any way that board members should not actually specify and point out the materials and be that detail oriented. So just to clarify. The other piece is on the parking, I'm very uncomfortable in, laying out and designing underground parking for this applicant. I also just want to make sure, because when I saw responses to ARB comments and reviewed the last meeting, I did not hear a lot of comments to the applicant to go back to an underground parking solution. And so I'm just wondering if that's correct, and are we a little bit unfair as a group now actually asking the applicant to go back to underground parking when that wasn't what I saw from the notes, and the staff, I don't believe, has directed or presented that. So to just noting that this is not the first meeting, this is the second meeting, I believe, and just how we actually offer feedback to an applicant, there does need to be some consistency, right, in terms of layered comments to actually provide critical feedback where an applicant might improve their application per the review of city staff. So are we comfortable just in terms of how this process has been in terms of our communication to the applicant with comments related to parking? And also, just having said that, maybe this isn't our purview as much. I mean, it is in that we hear a lot about these comments on parking, but I think we need to evaluate each application on what is presented, and also acknowledge that city has standards that the staff has reviewed and discussed with the applicant. So I'll just leave it there. I'm not sure where we are in terms of a motion today.
Okay, what I'd like to do is give David an opportunity to craft a motion that allows this building to go through today. See if you can get a second and get the vote on it, David, okay, before we go the way I think it's going to go. Does that seem fair to you?
Mm-hmm.
If you feel strong about it, here's your chance to put something together. So hearing what everybody said, what do you think will be a passing a motion?
All right. I would like to make a motion to approve the project today with the following items to be handled through committee. A landscape plan for the building from the consultant. A new materials board for consideration based on comments by the board. That's the motion.
So let's repeat. The motion is to approve the building today with a landscape plan coming back to subcommittee and a revised material board coming back to subcommittee. That's what I heard you say, right? Okay, do we have a second for that motion?
I'll second.
Second, okay. So the motion's been made and seconded. Does anybody want to address that motion? I think we've all said it. But,
Can I make a friendly amendment
go ahead.
to accurately depict the building's colors in the drawing set, and to accurately identify which perforated metal material goes where in the drawings. And to update the sustainability finding per board member Liu's comments. And that is my friendly amendment.
David, is that amendment acceptable to you?
Absolutely acceptable.
And Grace, how about you?
Yes, acceptable.
Okay, anybody else care to address that motion before we vote on it? Okay, then let's do a roll call. Vin, could you hold a roll call on the vote motion, please?
Sure. Jody, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think staff will have some questions just on details, and we want to make sure that the architect understands what we're asking for at the end, but we'll let the motion go through first.
Yeah, I'd like everybody to understand that I'm trying hard to get this through. I am very sensitive to the statements made about let's get these buildings through, let's not overdo it. I'm afraid I just can't support it myself, obviously, but I hope everybody recognizes that this is in the interest of moving forward. Let's go ahead with the vote. Vin, please hold a roll call vote.
Sure. Chair Bolte?
I'm opposed, no.
Board Member Hirsch?
In favor?
Board Member Lee?
In favor.
Board Member Liu?
Opposed.
Vice Chair Thompson?
Opposed.
Okay, the vote is 2-3, so this motion does not carry.
Thanks, Osman. Okay, so we're back to work then, right? The motion fails on the 3-2 vote. Okay, so let's try to break out what issues are necessary to get this thing approved. I think we all agree it needs a landscape plan. Let's do some straw poll votes and just make this quick. Who agrees that we need a full landscape plan to come back to the board? Don't raise your hand, just speak.
Just say yes.
Yes, who else is in agreement with me? I think we all are, but we need a landscape plan, right? Okay, what do we need to do to make the articulation on the facade better? Anybody want to add things to that? What the applicant needs to know from us what to do. This is our chance to be clear. As Grace said, we want to be moving forward.
I think the board might be split on this. I would suggest, I mean, I think I mentioned most of the elements in the friendly amendment, but to accurately render the building per the material board or the desired design intent, whatever that is, whether it is the sandy color or the punchy color, whatever the design intent is. And then I do think that the roof, that the upper top needs a little bit more articulation.
Okay, so we're hearing, we want to see the materials better and perhaps make some adjustments as to what they are, the color or the perforations. But then you're also saying some architectural, some building changes, especially on the third floor. Who else is in agreement or opposed to that? I find myself in agreement with that statement. David?
Yes,
Alex,
I'm actually in agreement with that as well.
Okay. Grace and Alex, how do you feel about
what it is? I'm not sure.
Well, that we leave to the architects. Grace?
I'm kind of opposing because I'm not sure what we're asking the applicant to do there.
Osmo, can you be more clear?
It's lacking a scale. At this time, it reads like a flat plane on that upper level. And I'm asking the applicant to add some scale and architectural refinement to the third level.
Adding scale and architectural refinement. Grace, does that answer your question?
Well, it's open-ended there. I'm going to read and listen for a while. Go ahead.
Well, now's the time to leave your microphones off so we can all speak. Alex, what do you think?
I will support that. I think we've gone over this before on other projects regarding cornices.
Yeah, we have. There's a track record of all of this, and so we're not breaking new ground here. to the applicants who care to look at other developments along El Camino. Okay, well, at least we have 4.5 people on behind that, so that's where we're going with it. The next issue, and probably the most contentious, is the parking. So let me put it out there. I would like to see the applicants, at the very least, give a serious proposal of possible underground parking. Doesn't say it has to be that way, but I'd like to see it studied more carefully. Do I have any support from anybody else on the board asking them to do that?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
I'd like to see a detailed plan for what underground parking might look like, even with the idea of getting a variance for a narrower ramp or steeper ramp, perhaps, to make the parking a little place where we grant the variance because the lot is small. I think you can justify that, as we'll see on the next application. But I think the answer lies in just redoing the parking altogether.
And to be clear, was this asked at the previous review and just not in the notes? I'm not sure why
Yes,
that
Grace,
was.
we had quite a bit of issue with the surface parking, and I remember distinctly saying you should bring it in off the alley, you should look for other solutions. We didn't give them answers, and I'm reluctant to even be saying put it underground. But what we're saying is it's the surface parking isn't really working.
So it's, to be clear, there was no ask for underground parking study at the previous.
Very hard to be doing that. We're looking for applicants to come up with the solution.
Yeah, so that I'm going to pass on this, agreeing with this
That's good.
advice at the second review,
Okay, so
since it wasn't discussed at the first review and the design was very similar.
fair enough. Fair enough. How about the rest of the board members?
I'm going to pass on that as well.
Okay, so Alex and
I support
Osmo.
it.
So Osmo would be in favor of a look at least at underground parking. Remember, we're giving the applicants guidance. They're ultimately in charge of their project and they're going to come back with whatever they want to do. Grace is asking us correctly that we should be clear. I think that's pretty clear.
I will support that, Peter. It seems to me it's in the comp plan. It's very clear in the comp plan about that. So I will support that. And I'm also open to any other alternatives they have for solving the parking ratio.
Okay, so that's 3 of us out of 5, 3-2 supporting at least a stronger look at the underground parking. I think that's the best guidance, Jody, we're going to be able to give you on that issue. We're a split board on it. And that's where we stand. Can we do a quick poll on the variance? That's a variance is essential. The director's looking for us to give them an up or down on that. And how do we feel about the justifications behind the shading variance right now? I don't see it. I can't recommend it on that grounds. How about the rest of you?
I'm comfortable.
Grace is comfortable with it.
I'm comfortable.
David is comfortable with it. Osmo and Alex?
I think I'm comfortable with it. I think we should note that even though it may not meet the requirements of the parking lot shading, I mean, the project potentially has like 5 sycamore trees around the street, which is a substantial amount of shade. That's all on city property. So I don't think that there's a bigger picture. I don't think there's an issue. I think we're just trying to meet the technicalities of the code.
Yes, that's right. Okay.
I have trouble with it. I have trouble with the variance just because heat island effect is a real thing. And I'm sure that code is in that place for that reason.
Jody, you're hearing a split board on that. This time it's 3-2 in favor of the variance. But I think if the staff could come back, or the applicant could come back with a better rationalization, perhaps something along the lines of what Alex just mentioned, or maybe a little more landscaping and less trees, maybe a better presentation that really showed us what the percentage really is. You might have a chance of getting that one through if that's where we end up going. What else are we missing here before we continue this? Jody, do you have anything that we haven't given you a straw poll on?
So I see us coming back with landscape drawings. There was some questions about the materials, just being more specific about the materials and the colors, which plays into the guideline about base, middle, top. We want to make sure what those colors are. There was talk about it sounds like for the base, middle, top guideline, we're focused on the top level, and that it's reading a little flat right now and needs some more scale to it. There was conversations about a cornice, but I don't know that does cornice sort of fit in with this style.
I didn't want to include that word in this necessarily. I
Okay.
think it's really just about adding scale.
Yeah, I think Osmo was talking about modifications to the third floor element, the stepped back piece, to somehow make that work better within the overall articulation of the facade. I don't think any of us want to see some cornice stuck on second floor in spite or whatever that would.
Okay.
And there's no issue with the step back. I think we all kind of like
Yeah, the
that.
testing is fine.
Yeah.
Okay, and then for the underground parking, there was at least 3 members in support of at least having a better study of that, you know, showing you the analysis that the architects have gone through, because we would, you know, it would be the preference to have underground parking. So we'll
Yes.
make a concerted effort towards that. Sustainability, board member Liu had some comments about that we will incorporate. And then on the variance, we had at least 3 members in support of the variance, and we'll see how we can better craft some findings around that and give you some better numbers.
If it's necessary.
Yeah, so I think that's most of it. I do know that Pratima, you know, maybe if the architect has any quick questions, because I do want to make sure that they have clear direction going forward.
Okay, let's hear from the architect.
So, and also too, we do have Ella Sun has a hand raised. I think we've closed the public comment period.
I think we've had enough. We've made ourselves very clear on this, Jared. Let's let the architect ask to the architect, do you have any questions about what we're putting out here? And if so, ask them now, please.
And is she
Let them speak.
unmuted?
Is that Pratima?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, Pratima, I have unmuted you, but you have to unmute yourself as well.
Okay. One important thing I want to clarify is the 3-form sample. There is no deviation in the color. This main sample was submitted at the ARB hearing, and the material board is at the City Hall. We had to make a new one for this meeting, and the mock-ups are from our previous samples we had here. The mock-ups color and the main color does not match. We have given the specification and color sample to you in the previous meeting, and you have no concern about the color in the previous meeting. Second thing about basement parking, the main reason we didn't go for basement parking is the soil condition.
Pratima, we asked if you had any questions about our motions. We do not want to re-argue the case now. I'll ask you once more, do you have any questions about what we're saying?
The main question about the basement, I just wanted to mention, we cannot proceed with that option because the soil is remediated and below 15 feet, it is contaminated. So we want to keep excavation to minimum.
Yeah, I think we'll study that.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's leave the applicant muted again, please.
Just also, just to clarify about the material, it's more about the representation in the drawings that it doesn't match the material.
I move that we continue this to a date uncertain, subject to the straw poll comments that we've made previously. Can I have a second, please?
I'll second.
Okay.
Oh.
Motion is moved and seconded. Can we have a roll call vote on that, please, Vin?
Yes. Chair Bolte?
Yes.
Board Member Hirsch?
Yes.
Board Member Lee?
No.
Board Member Liu?
Yes.
Vice Chair Thompson?
Aye. Yes.
This motion passes. Thank you.
Okay, so the motion carries 4-1. Thank you very much to the applicant and everybody. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back to session at 10:55. Thank you, everybody. Okay, so the Architecture Review Board is back in session. We're going to move on to action item number 3. This is a quasi-judicial hearing on 486 Hamilton Avenue, consideration of a major architecture review to allow the demolition of a 2,500 square foot commercial building and the construction of a new 3-story mixed-use project, including 2,500 square feet of retail space, 2,500 square feet of office space, and 4 residential units. Before we get started, I'll ask if we have any disclosures to make. I visited the site myself earlier this week. Anybody else?
Yeah, I visited the site yesterday and I looked at the colors and material board at City Hall.
Thank you, Alex. Any other disclosures?
No disclosure.
Okay, no other disclosures from Grace, Ozma, or David. Then we're ready for a staff presentation. So Sam, is that you?
Yes,
You
that's
looking
me.
sharp.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, terrific. Just want to verify in this Zoom world we live in. Okay, so I'm Samuel Gutierrez, the project planner for this project coming before you at 486 Hamilton Avenue. This is, of course, in actually just down the street from City Hall, not very far. So it is in the downtown context. And let me start presenting and then sharing my screen. 1 second. Okay, just to verify, can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So once again, this is 486 Hamilton Avenue. This is a photo of the proposed project. And there we have a little lag there, sorry. So the project overview, the project is before you for a formal review. In the past, this did come before you as a preliminary application, but currently it is a mixed use project located on 0.12 acres of land. Again, on the corner there, you can see the Google map of Hamilton and Cowper in downtown Palo Alto. It is a new 3-story mixed-use building, zoned CDC with a pedestrian combining district, and the application before you today is kind of a first run at formal. So we do request the Architectural Review Board provide some feedback. There's some discussion about design enhancement, and I'll go a little bit into the parking. And again, we're not looking for a recommendation at this time because this was a preliminary application. We want to see if they addressed the comments during the prelim to this formal before going further down in greater detail and reviewing the application. So just to show you the zoning in greater detail, here's an overlay of the zoning district around it. Again, it's a CDC with the P overlay in there. You can see the property identified. There is the downtown, one of the downtown lots located nearby, and there is a PC just down the street. So again, background, as I mentioned before, this application or this project came before you as a preliminary application on August 1st, 2019. At that time, it was a 4-story mixed-use project. And the ARB comments were to eliminate the 4th floor, reduce the height of the building, provide more landscaping, to address the blank walls that the preliminary application had presented. The details for small scale needed to be provided, and it needed a more residential feel. The ARB felt at the time that it was a bit more commercial. So that was where that comment was sourced. Here we have the proposed project. Once again, it's a 3-story mixed use building. So they did eliminate 1 floor. They added basement parking because in the preliminary application, there was surface level parking that was accessed off of Hamilton. And then they did provide more landscaping through vines and potted plants. They added balconies, and the upper floors appear more residential with better connection to the street. Here we can see a comparison between the preliminary application on the left and then what's proposed before you today on the right. So we could see the differences there on the left versus the right for this application. And here again, we have the elevation views as opposed to the rendering. You can see some of the changes on the projects, Hamilton elevation, again, left to right, and the Cowper street elevation, left to right. The left being the preliminary and the right being the proposed project. project breakdown. We have a 3-story building. 1 story is offset from the adjacent building on Cowper. The 2-story offset from the adjacent building on Hamilton. If you go back here, you can see the Hamilton building is that small parasol building, and then on the Cowper, you can kind of see it in the upper right, there's the Victorian style structure there, and that could be noticed here on the left. Moving on, so the ground floor has retail because the existing building does have retail space. The ground floor is proposed to have 2,466 square feet of retail. The second floor office space is proposed about 2,538, and then there are 4 residential units averaging about 982 square feet on the second and third floors. The total FAR is 2.0 to 1. The basement parking that as configured does allow for 13 spaces. It's a mixture of mechanical lift parking and standard parking, which is non-mechanical lift parking for this purpose. Some of the issues that we do have is that the setback for the stairwell and the elevator shaft, they encroach into that setback as proposed, and the parking dimensions for the garage are unusual but functional. The Office of Transportation did review, of course, with planning staff, and the parking does work, but it is a little irregular, and I will go in greater detail. And then, of course, the articulation along the elevations. Before, the ARB in the prelim had mentioned, it looks a little commercially and to add more residential feel, so perhaps the articulation as presented might present further issues. So going into the setback discussion, the south elevation has a stairwell, an elevator shaft that leads to the basement, and the required setback is 10 feet for residential uses in the building, where the stairwell has a 0-foot setback, and the elevator shaft has a 5.5-foot setback. So that's where perhaps a DEE or a project revision would be needed to address that issue there. Also, the project reduces the height from previous iterations. However, it just creates this massing issue for that stairwell and elevator. It's kind of a consequence of trying to address some of the ARB's previous comments. And here, going into the parking, 9 spaces in 2 mechanical lifts. We could see here kind of a quick section view. It's a 3-stacker. This isn't a puzzle lift as the board has seen before in other projects. This is a full 3-stacker fixed system that moves vertically up and down. And then there's a center kind of channel where the vehicle would come out as the proper vehicle that needs to come out with a load up or exit. There are 4 standard spaces. Again, standard means non-mechanical lift spaces proposed, and you can see that here in the right corner, the layout of the parking. And the basement spaces does include for parking for all the uses. There would be a shared parking kind of situation going on to accommodate all the different uses. Here's just the blow up of that basement layout and the design. Here you can see it is a ramp that comes down, and it is not the standard size required per the typical circulation, but in reviewing with the Office of Transportation, it does work it has this bottleneck feature that you see the driveway it has a wider opening towards the Cowper side, and then it narrows as you get into the garage, and that allows for vehicles to pass each other as they enter and exit. So it allows room to maneuver, and the Office of Transportation did feel that this was acceptable. Also, the backup clearances for all the parking spaces and the turning radiuses are pretty tight. So there are some minor details that we do need to confirm would work, such as the type of EVSE equipment that would be installed. Because if anything shifts here, it would, not make things pencil out as far as circulation. So those are some fine details, but before we got into those details, we just wanted to get the ARB's feedback on the overall project. Again, if things shift and move, then that would impact the design of the basement. So we do want to know what the ARB's thoughts are before we get into those nitty-gritty details. But for as is, the project does work in terms of the parking. So elevation articulation, the Hamilton facade used additional balconies to convey residential use on the upper floors. Again, you could see here the comparison between the two proposals, the left being the previous and then the right being the current. And then you can see that the project is also subject to public art requirements. One of the comments the ARB did have was, again, to reduce the blank walls of the project. And there could be an opportunity on some of those blank walls for public art. But again, before we get into that discussion, we wanted to see what the ARB's thoughts and feedbacks were on this iteration of the project before we go down that road more. Here's provided a cross-section of the project so you could see how this would work. Again, on the longitudinal side, you could see the parking stackers there and the driveway ramp and how that cuts down into the garage. And here you can clearly see how the parking stackers would go down another level for the lower parked car and then would go up a little higher for the top stacked car. And then the cross-section 2 would be the other side of the building, again, just seeing the cross-section to the garage. The project does have a landscaping plan, but it is very preliminary. We didn't go into deep discussion about it, but that is something that we want some feedback from the ARB on. Of course, it's a part of the ARB findings for landscaping. So I did want to just briefly touch on some of the kind of conceptual proposals that the applicant has put forward for landscaping for this project. Again, it's a little limited because they are building to the edges of the property, so that's something to be mindful of, that if landscaping does go onto the building, it would need to physically go onto the building rather than on the site. Or there would have to be some cutouts or planter boxes integrated, but it still limits where the landscaping can be. Again, this is a preliminary plant list that they're looking at. You'll notice that there aren't very many native plants, but moving forward, we can make adjustments and changes. So next steps is to incorporate these suggestions and direction from the ARB, complete the CEQA evaluation, which would also include a full evaluation of the historic status of the building, and return to the ARB for a future hearing to integrate all those changes and provide all the fine details. The recommendation before the ARB today is that the ARB consider the proposed project and provide feedback on the project design to staff and the applicant, and then to continue the public hearing to date uncertain to enable the applicant to submit landscape plans and staff to review the project in accordance with CEQA. And this concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you very much, Sam. Do we have any questions of the staff from the board? No one? Very well. We'll move on then to the applicant presentation. Vin, could you ask the applicant if they'd care to make a presentation, please?
Sam, who's the applicant for this?
Today, I believe it will be Kim presenting.
Okay, I see a Kim Tran. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, Kim, I will unmute you to speak. Can you also unmute yourself on your computer as well? Hi, Kim, if you're there, I have unmuted you, but you have to unmute yourself as well. It looks like we have a phone user who raised their hand. Perhaps this might be one of the applicants. User calling from a Galaxy S10 Plus. I'm going to unmute you.
Hello, can you folks hear me?
Yes. Can you identify yourself, please?
My name is Koi Lei, actually the architect for the 486 Hamilton Avenue.
If you could hold on one second. Sam, is this the applicant?
Yes, there's a part of the applicant team.
I just want to be sure, last time we had somebody sneak in, I want to be sure we're hearing the applicant.
Yes.
You are the applicant, okay.
We are the applicant, yes.
Great, it's very confusing.
No worries, no worries.
This is hard for everybody. Okay, so the rule is please state and spell your name. You'll have 10 minutes. Go ahead.
Good morning, board members, planners, city officials. My name is Koi Lei, spelled Khoi, last name Le, and we are the applicants for 486 Hamilton Avenue. Before we get started, I just want to thank the board members and the planners, Samuel and Jody, for helping us and guiding us through this process here and giving us awesome comments here, which we incorporated into the plans, as you'll see shortly. Samuel, do you mind showing your screen?
Yes, I'm going to share the applicant's presentation with everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Again, just confirming, can everyone see the presentation screen?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Perfect. Sammy, this is what you see before you, as Samuel stated before, this is a perspective view of the project, the proposed project at the corner of Cowper and Hamilton here. If you don't mind going to the next slide here, please. So I just want to talk to you folks about the site itself. It's a wonderful site in a wonderful city. It's a pretty interesting site, but a very challenging site. If you notice, it's only 43 feet wide and I believe about 125 feet long here. So it's very challenging here to fit any sort of parking or anything like that, or a garage in here. As you noted, Samuel, previously, the lot size is roughly about 5,300 square feet, and there's an existing one-story structure. I believe there's about 4 retail establishments in there, which occupies roughly half of the property, and the other half is just on-grade parking. I believe there's about 8 stalls there. And then in the lower left-hand corner, you can see that image there of what is existing. Samuel, do you mind going to the next one, please? So what we propose here is a 3-story mixed-use project, and the ground floor being roughly about 2,100 square feet. And we have roughly about 1,700 square feet of office space, which is located in the 2nd floor. And then the remaining square footage, usable square footage, goes to 4 3-bedroom residential units here. So the total gross floor area is roughly 10,750 square feet. Do you mind going to the next slide, please? So again, this is just a view of the proposed project there at the corner of Cowper and Hamilton. And in our initial presentation, the preliminary presentation, I guess we showed our renderings at the very last moment. And one of your first comments was, hey, show it in the beginning, get us excited about it. So here we are. So many of the comments that came from that preliminary meeting was that I think Chairman Peter, you stated it was a little bit too tall. You would not recommend it to be passed if it was 4 stories tall. So we took a look at that. We dropped it 1 floor. If you go to the next slide, please. And then board member David, you also mentioned that you don't want to see the parking or the garage parking entrance along Hamilton. That should be for retail or some other commercial activity there. So we took that into account, and what we did was we moved the parking and the parking entrance onto Cowper. And then you see that if you on the right-hand side, the entry to the parking garage is right at the corner of Cowper and Hamilton there. We did have to move a tree to make that happen, but if you look at this perspective here, the comparison on the left-hand side was the existing, what we presented about maybe almost a year ago, and on the right-hand side is what is proposed. So you see how much larger it is. It was, and we just reduced the scale quite a bit here to 3 stories versus the 4-story product there. If you go to the next slide, please. And what you see here is a view from the west of the property here, looking down Hamilton there. And we broke up the facade quite a bit. And if you can go to the next slide, you see a comparison between what we had about a year ago on the left-hand side there. You see how the parking garage is there, which dominated the Hamilton elevations and facade there. That whole experience was interrupted with that garage entry and whatnot there. So we went back to the drawing board and revised everything. Actually, it was pretty fun doing all this stuff. And then we put the garage entrance, as I mentioned, along Cowper, and put the building entrance along Hamilton there. And if you notice on the right-hand side, you see how we stepped everything and make everything a little bit more residential scale there. Can you go to the next slide, please? So what you see in front of you is a comparison before the previous, the old plan and the new plan. The proposed plan, which we're proposing today, is on the bottom, and the previous plan is up top there. So as I mentioned before, we took previously there's parking along Hamilton Avenue, and the garage entrance was on Hamilton Avenue. So that was a huge experience. As you walk past that, you'd see just a garage and car entrance. So what we did, per your advice, is we took the entrance and the garage and came off of Cowper, which is on the right-hand side, and went down into the basement. So if you go to the next slide, please. And one of the other comments, I believe, board member David, is that you didn't want to see all the trash and recycle, as you know, as you walk along Hamilton Avenue. And if you look at the previous plan, that's where we had it, along Hamilton Avenue, and then you have the entrance to the parking garage. So we took all that stuff and then we put it downstairs. So it's a much more pleasant experience as you walk along Hamilton. What you find now is that you're gonna walk past a nice little garden and the entry to the building, and then the retail there. We managed to fit all the retail on one level. In the previous plan, it was split on 2 levels, so it wasn't a continuous retail experience. So right now, the retail occupies pretty much 90% of the Hamilton walk-in experience here. And one of the things that, in our minds, what we wanted to do was we wanted to open up Hamilton and Cowper as much as we can. In the original plan, it shows a lot more, where we just opened up the corner with bifold doors and nano doors, a lot of landscaping and whatnot, and just leads you right into the retail experience. We still have a hint of that on our proposed plans there. We have beautiful, nice landscape stairs coming up into the retail experience. So the retail has 2 entrances, one from the left-hand side and one from the right-hand side at the corner, which we think is really important. Can you go to the next slide, please? So on the second level, previously we had retail, 2-story retail, and also a unit on one side, and then an open void space for the parking lift system and whatnot. So which, as you saw in the previous slides, it just dominated the elevation, and it was slightly unsightly. Again, we revised it, and right now we have all office spaces on the second floor, and then a residential unit on the also on that same floor there too. And throughout the whole floor plan, you also have planters and balconies, just to soften the building a little bit. Can you go to the next slide, please? On the next level, the third level, previously we had office space up here and 1 residential unit, but in this current plan, which we have, is 3 residential units. Again, we broke it up quite a bit. In the previous plans, it was quite monolithic, and the facade was pretty straight. And I think Ozma, you made a comment about, I'm sorry, board member Ozma, you made a comment about how we should chop it up a little bit and add more reveals and whatnot. So we did add a lot of ins and outs into the facades, and within those ins and outs, we have these outdoor balconies on all these 3 units there. In the corner of Hamilton and Cowper, there's a nice big balcony for that resident. In the middle, there's a nice balcony there for them too. And on the third, on the left-hand side, on the west, you see another nice balcony there. If you go to the next slide, please. So in the current plan, this level would just be roof, but the previous plan, we had two residential units here. But on this plan, as you can see, on the current plan, we just have just the roof plan here. So we took the whole building down roughly, I believe, 11 feet. The previous height building height was 50 feet. I think we're down to about 39 foot 10. Go to the next slide, please. Here it is. As you can see, the comparison, the previous section on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side, you see the proposed section here. And you see how we took the garage and we made that subterranean. And then all the residential is on the third level and the second level. I think if you, yeah, I think it's 50 feet for the previous project. And then our current one is 39 foot 10, I believe. Yep. Can you go to the next one, please? And here's the comparison between the previous view and the current view. And again, we're along Hamilton. We're looking east here. And we took one of your comments about trying to eliminate a lot of those blank walls and whatnot. So we did that. We chopped it up and quite a bit right at the entry next to that existing retail building there.
We're starting to approach 10 minutes.
Oh, I'm almost done. So, so again, this is another view from Cowper here, showing you the differences between what we're proposing right now, what we had previously, and notice how much smaller it is. Get to the next slide, please. This is just some elevations of the what we are currently proposing, and you see all the ins and outs of this building now. On the left-hand side, the middle, and the right-hand side. Next slide, please. Again, this is a view from Cowper here. Next slide, please. And this shows you the materials that we're planning to use here. We're thinking about some stucco here, and also we're wanting to add some eyebrows, aluminum arbors and whatnot, so we can hang a lot of greenery along there just to soften up the building a little bit there. And then I think one board member, Ozma, you mentioned before that we had our railing system looked a little bit too cheap. I think it was a grid system, a mesh. So we changed it out to a more stainless steel railing system. Next slide, please. And this, I believe this is the last slide here.
Second, we're running over 12 minutes now. Can you wrap it up in the next 20 seconds, please?
Perfect. So this is the last slide. This is shows you just the car lift system, which Samuel went over already. And this concludes our presentation here.
Thank you very much. Wonderful. With that, do we have any questions of the applicant from the board? Could you clarify for me then, please, the height of the third floor, the residential floor, and the second floor? When I look at the renderings, it looks like the third floor is taller. On your sectional drawing, it's showing both as having a 12-foot floor-to-floor or floor-to-ceiling height. Is that correct? What is the relative heights of those two floors, please?
Chairman Peter, you're absolutely correct. They're 12 feet each. Maybe it's the perspective that the model builder built this at. Makes the top level look a little bit taller. But you're absolutely correct. It's 12 feet.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Vin, do we have any public comments for this? I'll open the meeting to public comments right now.
Oh, we do have a member who just raised their hand, Jeff Levinsky. If there's anyone else who wishes to speak on this item, please raise your hand now. Otherwise, Jeff will be the final speaker. Jeff, I have unmuted you. Can you please unmute yourself on your computer as well? And then you may speak after you identify yourself.
Okay, this is Jeff Levinsky, Jeff Levinsky. Good morning, board members and staff. Several of us neighborhood people sent in a letter pointing out some concerns that we had about the project. One of those is that the calculations for parking appear to have been done not including the shared commercial space. And I heard different numbers even in the presentation and staff's numbers for the size of some of the spaces that differ from what's shown in the plans. So when this comes back, we hope that that would be considered. We also pointed out some concerns that aren't addressed about how the parking will be assigned between the different uses, as that has an impact on the floor area of the building. A point that was not in the letter, but and is not addressed in the study done by Hexagon, is that the parking for this building, and in fact the demand for parking for this building, is being reduced by the city's, well, the amount of parking the building has to provide is being reduced thanks to a 1,500 square foot reduction through a special provision of the city code. But that doesn't reduce the number of cars that will be looking to park. It's simply a reduction of how much parking the building is required to provide. This neighborhood is heavily overparked. It is the source of enormous contention and has created huge, long city council meetings over what to do about all that. The mixed-use parking study that Hexagon presents does not take into account the higher demand for parking that will exist at this site. Roughly speaking, there will be 40% more cars trying to park than the study considered if you look at what the 1,500 square foot allowance generates. The study from Hexagon doesn't explain how they determined which type of mixed-use building statistics to use. Normally, I've seen in other studies that have been presented to the city, it is very explicit about, well, we use this kind of building and the statistics were taken from this particular time and so forth, because it would be good for us to understand whether or not, when you're trying to fit these different uses in, if you're considering buildings that are in heavily parked area or underparked areas, and then this building having its additional unique problems with underparking because of the extra 40% that's not being handled by the underground parking. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Levitsky. Do we have any other public comments? Vin, anything else?
Chair Pote, we have no further public comments for this item.
Okay. To the applicant, you have an opportunity to rebut the public comments that were made. Would you care to do so? Could you unmute the applicant, please, again?
Yes, the applicant is unmuted.
Yes. Thank you, Jeff, for your concern about the parking and the parking requirements. We did do a study, as you mentioned, via Hexagon and whatnot, and we're asking for a 30% reduction, and that is due to the fact that we're close to a lot of the public transportations and also the train station. And then we're just hoping that we get that reduction there based on those conditions there and the parking study.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll close the meeting to public testimony and bring the item back to the board. Grace, you're going to lead us off. So if you could go ahead, please, whenever you're ready. Thank you.
That's good. Thank you. I just want to extend a thank you to our staff, planner, as well as our applicant in terms of this presentation and working with the ARB. I will start with the applicant's presentation. Thank you for going through each of the comments that my fellow board members had given and really showing us the changes that have been made since your preliminary. I think you're definitely headed in the right direction, and I'm happy to provide just some additional comments for moving forward. I am very happy to see the 3-story kind of response, and particularly how the massing has changed on the corner, I think is working quite well. There was a comment regarding blank walls, and I think there's still some room for improvement in terms of decreasing the blank wall length with some variation that I think was described previously as smaller scale detail. Maybe if there's a way to look at 3 areas, I just wanted to point out in terms of a finer grain or even large grain, medium grain, and a fine grain. That I leave it to you as the applicant in terms of how you might interpret that architecturally. I'm looking at the ground floor area that is rather long. I don't have the exact dimension. That is kind of that blank wall office space that does not change. The rhythm kind of continues. As well, on the second floor, I believe there's still some room also just to address the blank wall that this is facing Hamilton Avenue. The other place that I saw that could be a place to kind of further refine your design is that looking east, that very large stair. And, you know, again, the adjacent parcel might change and we don't know what's going to happen in the future. But when I'm walking down Hamilton towards Cowper, I find that kind of great expanse of stucco to be a change in scale that's a little bit jarring. And so maybe there is something to do there in terms of some design attention. What has worked quite well is your addition of balconies, which introduces that kind of medium grain or finer grain. As you move forward, it would be wonderful if the board is able to review some kind of a sunshade study that really kind of looks at how those balconies are shading and creating comfort for the users, and also just the larger massing and how the sun is going to move around this building. The other piece that I just saw, just in terms of your set, like I always like to have north arrows, and then also when you go to the materials board, before I go there, I just want to also talk about the public comment regarding neighborhood concerns on parking. And also, I believe Sam talked about the parking garage and the basement, because that was a big change that you made. So on the parking, it would be wonderful. I know that you're working with staff and they will be reviewing in terms of what those clearances are and how that parking garage is you know, meeting the counts, and also in terms of how it works, really, in terms of service and clearances. So I hope that you spend a lot of attention there working with staff, and then, you know, hearing the comments from neighborhood concerns. The other piece that, and I think right now we're just not, I'm not able to review it. I know that it's in transition and you're moving forward. I just want to make sure that the parking flow and the clearances actually work, given how tight those dimensions are. I think it's ambitious and I applaud you. And I think this is needed, some really terrific solutions to the parking. So just keep going. The other piece that I wanted to mention was the DEE. In terms of the 5 foot on that 3rd floor, you know, I am comfortable in terms of the way that it is treated and moving that forward. I look forward to hearing other colleagues here on the board speak about that, but I will leave it at that. The other piece that we should talk about is the landscape plan. And in terms of drought tolerant and native plants, I think there's probably another design iteration to go there as well. And overall, it seems like the right direction. But again, sunshade study, understanding just how, as you refine the design, that will affect your plant palette. Please do pay some attention there. And now we'll go to the, what was I talking about? It was, oh yes, the colors and the materials board. So I did have a chance to go over to City Hall and review in the display case. So first off, there's a lot of Milano cotton. And I think that's that cream color that is the stucco color. And my feeling is it may want to be revisited in terms of glare and tone. And perhaps there's another color in the palette that is added, or another material as you begin to refine the design and introduce a fine, medium, kind of large scale grain treatment to the blank walls as well as the eastern stair. So I think that covers everything that I wrote down. So I'll go ahead and pass it over, Peter, to who is going to speak next.
Thank you, Grace. Very thoughtful comments. Alex, would you care to go next?
Okay, sure. So I just want to say to the architect, I think you're very crafty, and I think you've come up with a very ingenious scheme. I think you've made a number of huge improvements to the project. So I am generally in support of the project. So the issues that I have flagged here is one is, I think, on the existing street trees. I think there's one that's labeled as an existing pear on cowper, and that's actually like a liquid amber, I believe. And then I think the larger point, though, is that if on this very small site, when you're digging a basement, that we're really not going to be able to save. I'm doubtful that we're going to be able to save any of the trees. So I think we actually need to look at how that all gets replanted after construction of the building. And so I think we need to see something that's realistic there. On the native plant finding, I think that this particular project has a lot of very unusual and very difficult circumstances. So I'm willing to. I think it's fine to consider alternate plants, like non-native plants that will actually work in very difficult situations. On the materials for it, I saw that you had the Starfire glass, like a low iron glass. And we do have that on some of our buildings downtown. It's usually only the first floor because it doesn't really meet the California Energy Code. And there are ways to work around the code or work with the code. But it's pretty unusual to see that on all floors of the building. So I mentioned that because I think that the Hamilton Avenue is, at least that ground floor, is kind of relatively flat. So I guess I just want to see what you're thinking about there. If you're thinking about two different kinds of glass, and then how do we break the building if it has two different kinds of glass on the facade. Regarding how it is compatible with the old house, which is actually an office building. I think, what is the address? 610 Cowper. I think you've made a lot of improvements by having some recessed areas on the first and second floor to make it a little bit more more open to the neighbors, and I think that's all good. You are showing some like cable screens right at the property line, and I think we want to look at that really carefully to see how compatible it is with the old Victorian era house, and maybe there are ways of using a different material that's a little bit more sympathetic with the old house next door. I can support the DEE. I think the narrow ramp can work. We've done it on one other project. I think there's the 636 Waverly project, had like a one aisle, or whatever, what did I say, one car width wide driveway. And I don't know of any problems. Maybe staff can review that if there have been problems on that project. So that's all that I have. I'm generally in support of the project. It's going in the right direction, and I look forward to seeing the next submission.
Thank you very much, Alex. David, your turn.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It is a significant improvement.
David, it's a bit quiet. If you could speak up or louder.
Try to. Voice seems to be going here. Can you hear me better? Peter, is that better?
A little bit better.
A little bit. If I can raise this.
David, you're muted.
Okay. Test mic. Well, I'm up to full volume on my. So let's try. Okay, so the sorry, can you hear?
You're better
better.
now.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. Can we put up the elevations, the kind of perspective elevations from Hamilton?
Sure, one moment, Board Member Hirsch.
Okay. And there's one that shows both directions.
Is this the elevation you're looking for, sir?
Okay, well, that's good enough for now. Well, certainly this is an incredible improvement for Hamilton's elevation. But on the parking, Alex brings up a very good point. I think that the parking in the cellar area there could use more work, and I know it will affect things upstairs, but I still think that sort of if the ramp went straight down and you had the recessed areas for the lift on the other side of the building, or the furthest to the other end of the building, you might come up with a better scheme. I think you need some additional work on the parking in the basement area. One particular reason is that we're down in the cellar, and now the parking is going to go further down, and it affects the structure of the neighboring house, the historic house. I would be concerned about that impact of the neighbor. That once you dig a foundation that deep, you create problems with the foundation of the neighboring building. At least you have to study that piece. But the fact that it also isn't going straight down to the cellar really affects the plan of the commercial first floor and its entry area there as well. And kind of interrupts the commercial on the ground floor. So I'd be looking for a further study of how it works. But it certainly is it certainly is a significant improvement over what was in the first case. Reducing the level, as we had recommended, is excellent. One of my main concerns, I'll just get to it now, is the way in which garbage was collected in the previous scheme. Now we have some of the garbage being way to the other end of the cellar, way too far away. I don't know why it isn't possible to have that located somewhere off of the lobby, even if it steals a little space away from the commercial. But my biggest kind of concern here is the mix of the second floor, the fact that it's a commercial space and a residential space. It really kind of bothers me that it would be so much better if it were all residential. So where there's a kind of zoning reason for it becoming quite a little. Oh, okay, so that's what you're showing. I think the garbage removal needs to be studied somewhere. Anyhow, get on from there. The other aspect of it is this mix of commercial on the second floor. Access to it is through the main lobby, up the elevator, down a very long corridor. I think either you eliminate it and make residential on that floor, following the plan on the top floor, or will you find some way of duplexing the commercial on the ground floor so it works with what upstairs, making a larger single-use user. In some way, I find that to be a really confusing idea, is to have people getting to the commercial on the second floor via the residential elevator. It's true of the last building we looked at, but and I would have had that same comment there as well. But this is for board members to think about. You know, this elevation here that's showing the proposed scheme is incredibly better than what was certainly there before. So I like that elevation. And then if you flip back to the opposite one, Sam, the other end. Anyhow, what we're looking at here is no differentiation between a commercial storefront look and residential area. And I find that to be a problem with the scale, and that's what we talked about, I thought, the last time. The scale should change at some point when changing a use of a floor. I don't know if everybody agree with me. Yeah. Oh, yep. Yeah. It just seems to me, just me here.
Sorry, David, that last bit is hard to understand.
Try it again. Can you hear?
I think if you lean forward, you're closer to your microphone. It's a little easier to hear you.
Okay, maybe it's this way. There really should be quite a change in scale, I think. You know, I note the building that's on the corner of next to City Hall, the new one on the corner, adjacent to it. The whole of the top floor residential, quite substantially different than the commercial down below. I find that there ought to be a change in scale based on the kind of change in use, significant change in use. But what it is exactly the same all the way through this building. So it really gets to me to make it monotonous. There would be so much more interesting if it were a change in scale. But there is a conflict on the second floor between commercial and residential, and they look exactly the same. I'm really bothered by that. Color, there's a mention of color. It certainly is a bright building, perhaps overly bright based on the neighborhood, the brick building on one side and a much more muted light building across the street. I think it stands out, the color stands out too much, and there could be more variation, let's say, between the faces of the building that are one use group and the core of the building, the stair tower, etc. Modulation in that respect. Now that's the back of the building. I actually find that elevation to be very interesting. So there is a lot of openness towards the historic building, and that parking lot in the back of the historic building. Those are pretty much my concern, is to especially, I would question why it is that you have a second commercial that's accessible only by an elevator to a rear passageway that leads down the long passage to get to the entry to that building. Is that really going to work? Or wouldn't it be better to create a staircase separate, get you into the upper floor right from street level, and keep the elevator only for handicapped accessibility to the upper floor? I think that there's a dichotomy here of uses that just doesn't function that well. And that's really my major concern, and that and the scale of the residential versus commercial growth. Thanks.
Thank you very much, David. Very thoughtful comments. Ozma, your turn.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you to the applicant and staff. Really thorough presentation, which gave us a really nice comparison of what was there before and what is now. I do agree with a lot of what the other board members have mentioned. I do think that what we're seeing today is an improvement from what we had seen before. However, I do also agree with board member Lee that there is still a little bit of some way to go. And particularly it's on the few items that were mentioned last time, which were the blank walls, the small scale, and the residential feel. I mean, the addition of the balconies has helped a lot with the relief of the facade. But I concur with board member Hirsch that the residential architectural style and commercial architectural style blur very much. And to the there's 80 this is a little bit over, I forget how big this parcel is. It's like almost 100 feet long. There's at the bottom there's 85 feet of glass, and there can be more to be done to sort of add a bit more visual interest. Would encourage the architect to push a little bit more in terms of relief of the facade and small scale. And I do think having this differentiation in program actually adds to the reason why you can change up the scale a bit as you go up the building. I think the next time we see this, it would be really nice to get a better understanding of the building's relationship with the adjacent house that board member Lou was referring to. The one view that we did see in the presentation was not very close up and detailed. There is actually a lot of that facade that's going to be visible to the public that is currently pretty blank. And I agree that the mesh wire gate might not be the best choice to interface with the adjacent building. So a view from Cowper, sort of understanding that relationship between the two buildings would be good. And I also concur that the view from Hamilton still has a blank wall where the stair is, that needs to be worked on. So yeah, I'll just reiterate, still needs a lot more articulation and smaller scale, and there's still more to be done to sort of give that the residential feel and sort of differentiate from the commercial feel. And as for the color, yeah, I did also look at the City Hall display case. The color looked a lot brighter than what I'm seeing on my screen. It looked like a lot closer to a white, and what we're seeing is kind of a sandy beige. And so, yeah, it's definitely something to consider. I might consider adding a bit more variety to the color palette. This is, right now this is just kind of two materials, and the project might benefit from the added scale might come potentially with some more diversity in the materials. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Ozma. I'm not going to belabor the point more. I think very similarly to my colleagues on the board, you've made tremendous improvements. The building, I believe, can be approved at some point, but it's not there yet. I agree completely with almost everything everyone said. I think Grace put it very nicely, talking about the sense of scale, and it's lacking. It doesn't seem to have quite a refinement, and that's a nice way to think about how to get that. I think David and Ozma are correct, talking about the need to express residential versus commercial uses, and that's probably where the answer lies in your design, is to study that. What I'd like to do is throw out to you that I think the problem lies perhaps with your basic partie of arrangements for the circulation, the vertical circulation. It's the two stair towers that create the difficult parking situation downstairs. It's the one stair tower on the east side that creates the need for the design enhancement exception. The stair towers create a single loaded hallway situation on the second and third floors, which creates some very uncomfortable bedrooms in the apartments. Let's see, in apartment number 2, 1 and 2, and then apartment number 3 in particular has a bedroom with the only window looking out on a hallway that's even fronted on a piece of wall on the other side. It's worse than a typical motel. That's just not high quality design. I think the answer lies in rethinking how you integrate that vertical and horizontal circulation. That will also bring you around to the way you have the second floor horizontal circulation shared between commercial and residential. What it looks like now, honestly, is that that's going to be all office spaces. That whole second floor really is a commercial layout right now, and it's very easy to make it that way in the future. And we're asking you to design sort of with integrity all the way through that. Residential spaces are truly residential in a mixed-use building. I can understand how frustrating it is to hear that and how challenging it is. It is truly a challenging design problem to get this one worked out, but that's mixed use on a tight lot. We're asking you to make the mixed use genuinely mixed, mix it up. I think that the answer again lies in how you reconfigure your circulation. And if you do that, you'll get there even better, I believe. My last comment will be to do with the materials. I think the colors are going to be too bright. They're also just too monotonous right now, just that one plaster color. Finally, I'd say that that acrylic plaster is not in my book what I call a really high quality material. It's sort of a basic building material you put on the back of a large building facing something that's not important. And you're using it an awful lot in the front, where I prefer to see some sort of panelized stone material or tile or something that's a little bit more deftness, craftness to it. Just express more the nature of the building somehow. This is just seems like it's almost a paint color applied to everything. And I'm having a hard time with that. That doesn't work for me. I think also your green landscaping on the sunshades up on the second and third floors is something you can add in a computer, but I don't quite see how you get that to actually grow. It gets awfully hot and dry in that environment, and I don't think those will work the way you've got it. And I'm not sure they actually help you any either. So no more need for me to belabor the point, though. I think what we've said is fairly consistent and accurate all around. Does anybody else have any further comments? If not, can someone make a motion for us, please?
I move that we continue the project to a date uncertain.
Subject to the comments we've made.
Subject to the comments that we've made and that are in the planning staff report.
Do I have a second for that? David, you're seconding that?
Yeah.
Okay, anyone want to address that motion? Any questions from the staff or the applicant? Jody, are we clear enough?
I know that Board Member Thompson needs to leave soon, but I did want to ask the applicant if they have any questions. Again, not a rebuttal, but just questions.
I'm open to that if the applicant would care to address it. Vin, could you unmute them? Yes. Any questions from the applicant, please?
No, I think you folks are very clear on the points that you folks have made, so no questions on our part.
Cool. Thank you for the
Thank
hard
you.
work and the changes you've made. It's going in the right direction, and we very much look forward to this being a successful project.
No worries. Thank you.
Great. Vin, can we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Chair Bolte,
Yes, I'm in support of the motion.
Board Member Hirsch,
Yes.
Board Member Lee,
Yes.
Board Member Liu,
Yes.
Vice Chair Thompson.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
Okay, so we're 5 in favor, none against. The motion carries. And we're going to move on to the next item. Before we do that, I believe Board Member Lee is going to excuse herself.
Yes, I will excuse myself from this item and the rest of the meeting. And thank you all.
Thank you very much for your help today, Grace. Okay.
Thanks, Grace. Chair Balte.
Yes.
I have to go. I think we had all sort of budgeted this meeting to go till noon, and it has gone over. Of prior obligations I can't get out of. I'm wondering if the subcommittee can be postponed to another time.
Let me understand this. We have the bus stop to do, and then we have a meeting, minutes of something, and then a subcommittee. Do we have a subcommittee?
Yes.
Correct.
Who's on the subcommittee right now?
Sorry?
Who's the subcommittee members right now? Can we just change that assignment?
Yeah, I'm on.
Alex?
It's me and Board Member Liu
And
right now. But I'm
Is the hotel at the on El Camino.
Oh, that one, right. No, I don't think we should do that, Osma. I'll step in your place instead if necessary.
Okay.
Because I think you can sign off. That's fine. As long as we have a quorum, we'll be okay. Alex and I will handle the subcommittee then. Thanks, Osma.
Okay, thank you. I'll excuse myself from the rest of the meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, then we're going to move on to action item number 4. This is a public hearing, quasi-judicial for 250 Hamilton Avenue, recommendation on applicant's request for minor board-level architecture review of 3 new bus stops in the public right-of-way located at 3380 Coyote Hill Road, 3223 Hanover Street, and 1501 Page Mill Road. Can we have a staff report? Do we have any disclosures to make? I will disclose that I went out and visited one of these sites. I can't remember which, but I didn't know. Alex?
Yeah, I visited the bus shelter on Quarry Road, and I looked at the trash cans at Palo Alto Square.
Thank you, Alex. David, any disclosures?
No.
No. Okay. With that, can we have a staff report, please?
Okay. Good morning, board members. My name is Garrett Sauls, and I am the project planner for the Stanford Research Park Bus Shelter Program. This project came back to the board today after receiving comments back in December of last year. To give a quick overview of the project, basically what it is the Stanford is looking to establish bus shelters within their research park that would be providing a universal design that could be approved, kind of similar to a master sign program. There's quite a number of stops that currently do not have either a bus shelter or the structure is dilapidated or in poorer form that they would like to upgrade for their for the community that is, the workers within the research park. Each site within this proposal, each site would be upgraded to meet ADA and public works standards for clearance requirements and other sort of accessibility needs. Each site would include photovoltaic panels on the roof and include waste containment facilities. And just as an overview, there's over 60 stops, bus sites within the Stanford Research Park, again, with kind of the varied levels of shelter service. With this kind of approval, we would be looking at something that may be more like an over-the-counter review of a future bus shelter or potentially a staff level application if there were modifications needed to the site that would not conform with the designs that have been presented in the staff report. Here you see kind of a summary of the comments of what were provided in December. Primarily, you see that the concern was about maintaining sidewalks along the adjacent to the bus shelters, and that they would still be able to provide enough spacing for pedestrians to pass through the space. Public Works and Transportation have reviewed this, and they have provided conditions of approval that would be protective of those measures. There was concern with the use of the EPA wood material on the trash enclosure structure, and that could have some weathering over time. That's now been replaced with a polyethylene or plastic material. And so that overall has helped to make that change in the project. The bus shelter, the bigger comment that the board had provided was that the bus shelter should try to complement an integrated structure design into what some of the newer buildings or the type of modern or futuristic looking buildings that we have within the research park. And we'll have a comparison of the previous design and the new design later on. There was less concern about the color of which staff had raised previously, and you'll see in the plans that those have been addressed. Those have been changed to be more of a aluminum silver metal panel color. The other significant comment the board provided was that the structure before was a little darker and heavier, and they wanted to see more glass and transparency and light brought into the structure. And so those will be shown shortly. And lastly, there's some clarification that was needed about who will be maintaining these structures. So Stanford has an agreement, a third-party agreement with VTA Real Estate to be maintaining and installing these structures over the life of them. And that is reflected in the conditions of approval that would be maintained. And so you should be able to see that in the staff report as well. So for the 3 sites that we're talking about today, they are 3380 Coyote Hill Road, 3223 Hanover, and 1501 Page Mill. 3380 Coyote Hill is the #1 star that you see down here. 3223 is #2, and 1501 Page Mill is #3. So you can see here some of the older structures that are present out at the site right now on Coyote Hill. You can also see that there are other sites that either just have a bench, or there are other additional sites within the research park that don't kind of have any sort of covering at all, or any sort of bench either. And so this shelter would instead serve to replace all of those and make the accommodations for bus travelers more inviting and welcoming and comfortable. Some key considerations for the design. This design will help kind of inform staff into searching for creating a consistent design to go throughout the city. Transportation has been working a little bit with VTA to figure out, what are some opportunities within the city that this kind of design or concept could be implemented so that we can have some updated shelters, because we do see a number of shelters, bus shelters within the city limits outside of the research park that are also in fairly similar conditions. As was mentioned before, these sites would be, all of them would be upgraded with ADA upgrades, photovoltaic panels, and include waste collection facilities, and be maintained by Stanford so that there aren't waste collecting in the area or any sort of damage or graffiti or anything kind of finding itself at the sites. Overall, the materials used are of high quality and long-lasting nature. There's a reduction in the IPA wood material and an increase in the glass used on the site to help make that structure more apparent. Since the original design was brought to the board, Stanford changed it so that it would be a silver aluminum panel or a silver aluminum metal material, and so staff doesn't have any concerns about the color choice that has been presented. And our last motion is that we'd recommend approval of the proposed project to the director based on the findings and conditions of approval that are in the staff report. So here are a couple of slides to show some other structures that are out there currently in the world. On the left-hand side, you see more of the standard VTA bus shelter that has been around kind of in the area. And on the right-hand side, we see what is called the Landscape Forms 1.0 version of the bus shelter that you'll be seeing in a second, that isn't available anymore, but was used along Quarry Road and near the hospital previously. So with this design, you can see on the left-hand side was the previous design that the shelters include, and I'll scroll in a little bit so that it's maybe a little bit more apparent. On the left-hand side, you see kind of these structural beams that are coming here in this wood panel underneath. On the right-hand side, you'll see now that the structure is presented to be much more open. There's a greater significant amount of glass on each of the sides and on the roof material to allow for a lot more light and transparency, as the board had asked for previously. And we can also see a photo simulation of what the structures would be looking at, or what the structure would be looking like at nighttime as well. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Garrett. Do we have any questions? Do we have a staff presentation, or was that the applicant presentation as well?
The applicant will be presenting as well. So Vin, if you could enable Jason McCarthy and Jamie Jarvis to present and have their audio visible.
Okay, if those two can just unmute their microphone, you can speak.
Welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record. You'll have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, this is Jamie Jarvis, just confirming that you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. And I hope I'm sharing my screen. Oh, Jason's got his screen on, so that'll work. Thank you for having us here today. And Garrett, thank you for that introduction. My name is Jamie Jarvis. And Jason, if you could advance to the next screen.
Well, let me see if I'm things are working here. How's that?
Perfect. So Jamie Jarvis, Jamie Jarvis. I'm the Director of Sustainable Transportation Programs for the Research Park. And I've developed and managed the commuter transportation program for the Research Park for the past 4 years and would like to spend just a few minutes reacquainting you with the context for our bus shelter project. And then Jason McCarthy will present our new shelter design. Next slide, Jason. The Stanford Research Park Transportation Program is known as SRP Go and provides comprehensive commuter transportation service to 140 companies and approximately 29,000 employees in the research park. To support transit use, Stanford and our tenant companies purchase discounted smart passes that provide free fare on all VTA and Dumbarton Express buses. We also provide free shuttles from the Palo Alto and California Avenue Caltrain stations, and we fill gaps in public transit service with SRP Go long distance commute buses. Next slide, Jason. Our efforts have reduced solo driving by 10 percentage points over 3 years and nearly doubled transit use from 6% to 11%. We're very proud of these accomplishments and are committed to further increasing the use of commute alternatives. However, we feel the current state of the bus stops throughout the research park limits our ability to increase transit use. Next slide. We currently have a mishmash of aging and unattractive shelters, and some of our most well-used transit shelters or transit stops have no shelter at all. Next slide. We believe attractive, functional bus shelters are key to attracting new transit riders. And for this reason, we propose to install new high-quality bus shelters at 3 locations along interior roads in the research park. When we first presented this project to you last December, you were supportive of having new bus shelters in the research park, but weren't thrilled with our custom design and specifically asked for a lighter and more modern shelter. The shelter we're proposing to you today is a landscape forms design that we believe reflects your guidance. The shelter is already installed in 2 locations in Palo Alto along Quarry Road and has also been specified as a condition of approval for the 3223 Hanover project. We envision that this shelter will become the preferred option for future shelter replacements and additions in Stanford Research Park. I appreciate you allowing me to provide the context for our shelter project. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Jason McCarthy, Principal at Studios Architecture, to present the design.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. And it's a pleasure to be with you and present this on behalf of Stanford. We've been working carefully with Stanford on the development of the design and essentially exploring options following up on the conversation and the discussion that was held in the first hearing. And what we're coming forward with today, we think addresses all of Stanford's goals for the project in terms of the transportation goals that Jamie's outlined. And we think also really helps address all of the important topics that were raised in the initial hearing. Principally, what we think we're proposing is a very light structure, something that's very elegant in design and engineering, very contemporary in feel, that's a complement to the other buildings in the research park, or the buildings in the research park, in the sense that it's appropriate to the context and also the material sensibility that you find in adjacent structures nearby. So the structure itself is an aluminum frame, which is very thin design, very elegant, and it supports a glass surround and a glass canopy, which we think will really allow for a lot of light, a lot of transparency, very welcoming design that we think ultimately will support and attract greater ridership in the research park and ultimately create a great addition to the streetscape and the sites that are proposed here. A little bit more about the design that's proposed. We are including a small photovoltaic array on the roof of the canopy, if you will, and that photovoltaic helps this shelter operate off the grid. So the lighting that's integrated into the structure will be funded, or if you will, energized by this photovoltaic array, and very low energy consumption system and very high sustainability, in keeping with what we think are the goals of Palo Alto and Stanford more broadly. Again, the glass surround is very transparent, glazing with distraction dots for safety, but that high transparency we think allows for a lot of natural light, but also provides safety from a visibility standpoint. We think is very functional in terms of ease of maintenance. The canopy, the glass at the canopy has a translucency to it, so that provides a good amount of shade while still bringing a lot of natural light through and creating a comfort for the rider who's waiting for their bus. The materials that are proposed, again, are very sort of simple and elegant, we think, very forward-looking palette. The silver metallic frame and other metal components of the shelter is sort of the primary material, which we feel is timeless and consistent with the feel of the research park in general and these sites. And that metallic framing element is accented by the epay that you see on the wood bench, and then the black plastic trash and recycling containers in that receptacle design. There's a couple of additional example images we have this is the landscape 2.0 shelter design that we're proposing and the silver metallic frame. And just wanted to share these images to give you a better sense of the real refined engineering that we find. We were just really drawn to this shelter design and felt that it was going to be a great addition to the research park. Materials that are proposed, the epay gives a warmth to the overall design, making it very attractive and welcoming. But again, it's very durable material that can be maintained relatively simply. And then just further images reflecting the overall quality of the engineering behind these products and their specification. So we hope that all of this is in keeping with the level of quality that you see more broadly in the research park. And ultimately, we hope that you'll agree that what we've proposed is a very elegant solution for an important function in the research park and beyond. So with that, that concludes our presentation. We're happy to address any questions that you may have, and I'll stop at that point. And I'll stop sharing, I suppose, so the staff can take back over.
Thank you very much, Jason. Any questions for the applicant from the board members? No? No? Okay, do we have any public comments? I'll open the meeting to public comment. Vin, anything?
Chair Bolte, we do not have any public comments at this time.
Anyone wishes to address us, now is the time. Okay, I'll close the meeting to public comment and bring it back to the board. Alex, why don't you take us along if we have to? I'm envisioning we can approve this fairly quickly, but go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I'll move that we recommend approval of the project to the Director of Planning.
David, would you care to second that?
No comment, you mean, or what?
That's basically what he said, yeah.
Oh, so I mean, I want to just, congratulate the team there on what they presented before we voted in.
Why don't you second the motion and comment on it?
All right, I'll second the motion.
Okay, would you care to address the motion you just seconded?
Yes, I would.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm kind of thrilled by this one. It has all of the qualities that really we needed here. The detail of that shelter is really amazing. It will fit in almost any location. I guess, I have a little concern about the epay and its structural capability to span, but if it's in use, I'm okay with it. The glass panel isn't really shown as being as transparent as it is shown in the rendering. So will it be more transparent in some ways than in others? I don't quite understand that. Maybe Jason could respond to it in some way. Turn his mic back on. Or Barrett, respond to the transparency.
I'm happy if I may. Yeah. The renderings that we shared, the computer renderings. It's a tricky thing to get the computer to show glass accurately sometimes, but it is a fairly transparent glass. The photos that we've shared today, I think, are more representative. The renderings actually suggest something more translucent rather than clear. We just wanted you to know there was glass there, because if you make it go too clear in the computer, it kind of disappears from view, so we may have over tweaked the glass. So the photos are a better representation.
Okay. It's just a very good choice throughout, and I'm really pleased by making those changes. I have one question I have in Coyote Hill. It looks like that's a very steep site. Is the camera at an angle, or is it really the speed is at an angle? In which case, it's going to look a little different than it does when it's on the flat. Could you answer that one, Jason?
Yeah, it is a sloping site, and in each of these sites, that there's some slope to the hillside, as you find throughout the research park. But for each of these sites, we're able to create a leveling, if you will, by addressing a little bit uphill and a little bit downhill. We're able to create a level area for the shelter itself that allows us to meet the accessibility requirements and so forth.
So what happens with the supports that are around the perimeter?
They're generally within that leveled portion. So the area of the shelter and the surrounding sidewalk will be at a minimal cross slope for drainage for accessibility compliance. Is that answering your question?
Two sides to it, and the change in basic size, basically to accommodate the slope. Is there some way to adjust those two sides for the slope?
Yeah, there's a detail for the footing that will allow them to level this in the field. I don't think we have that detail shown, but I think they anticipate that there's a certain amount of finessing this to fit to the contours of the slope.
Okay, have explored that so that you know what it will look like. And it's not. Okay, I'm fine with it.
Thank you, David. So the motion's been made and seconded. Vin, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Chair Bolte,
In favor, yes.
Board Member Hirsch,
Yes.
Board Member Lee is absent. Board Member Liu,
Yes.
Vice Chair Thompson is absent. This motion passes.
Motion carries 3-0. Thank you very much. Congratulations. It's a great design.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to study session preliminary review. I don't think we have anything, do we, Jody?
No, we have the minutes, I believe, would be next.
Okay, so next is approval of minutes. Does anyone have any comments about the minutes from the meeting from April 16th of this year? Alex, you must have something.
I looked at the minutes. I have no comments.
Whoa!
I read them too. I have no comments. David, anything else? Why don't you?
No comments.
Who wants? David, make us a motion.
I make a motion that we adjourn.
You motion.
You want me to motion that we accept the minutes?
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay, I think I heard you say you move that we accept the minutes. I second that motion. Vin, a roll call vote, please.
Yes, Chair Bolte,
Yes.
Board Member Hirsch,
Yes.
Board Member Liu,
Yes.
motion passes 3-0. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Board member questions, comments, and announcements. The North Ventura plan, anything for us, Alex?
The next meeting is on May 26th. That's Tuesday at 5:30. It'll be via Zoom. So the agenda is available at paloaltonvcap.org.
Okay, so there's nothing new. We're waiting for that meeting to take place.
Nothing has happened since the last ARB meeting.
Great. Okay, then we're all set. The meeting is adjourned. We're going to move to a subcommittee meeting. Thank you very much, everybody.